Mankind was on the verge of extinction because of the monsters, but then a powerful magician appeared. He entered the battle to save people from imminent doom. To do so, the warlock used forbidden black magic, paying for it with his life force. His dark spells rained down on the hordes of monsters, throwing them into confusion. At the cost of incredible effort, he sought to protect the remnants of humanity by destroying his enemies. In the midst of universal crisis and despair, he saved the world, but the fate of the hero was unenviable. His end was tragic. The people he saved sentenced him to execution by guillotine. Just before his death, the hero, looking at his executioners, uttered his last words. An ominous curse that promised to change the world came from his bloody lips. Nevertheless, after the departure of the hero, the long-awaited peace finally reigned in the world. 100 years had passed, and the sunlit village of Floss was serene. Drops of water gently washed the petals of the bright yellow flower under the warm rays. Suddenly awakened by the moisture on his face, the blonde-haired young man sleepily asked, "Violet, what are you doing in my house right now?" The girl with purple hair, whose name was Violet, replied with a sweet smile that she was watering flowers. It turned out the young man was lying right in the flower meadow, and Violet was indeed watering the flower bed, but he wanted to clarify another thing. Shaking the droplets from his hair, he wondered with mild irritation why she had chosen to water his face specifically. In the meantime, the streets of the village were bustling with the usual life. Residents scurried about, a dog ran by, and an orc peacefully neighbored with the humans. Later, the same young man found himself in a local tavern, where his appearance immediately elicited whispers and curious looks from those around him. 3 female visitors, one of whom was just filling a mug, looked at him particularly intently and with undisguised surprise. The good-natured, mustachioed innkeeper with a broad smile placed the ordered dish in front of him, an impressive piece of roasted meat. The innkeeper asked if the meat was to Lord Lewis's liking, to which he grinned and replied in the affirmative. Then the tavern owner whispered to Luis that an epidemic was raging in the neighboring village, which surprised him. The young man suggested that perhaps that was why his friend was out of touch, and the innkeeper added thoughtfully that he had never seen him sick. Suddenly, the innkeeper suggested with horror whether this was due to a hero's curse from the past, but Luis, continuing to eat, confidently denied it. The owner of the establishment also noticed that the atmosphere in the tavern itself was unusual today, to which Luis asked with a chuckle if it was because of the epidemic. The innkeeper picturesquely announced that an epidemic of love had spread throughout the tavern, all thanks to Lord Louis. Luis warned with mild irritation that he would leave if he continued to talk nonsense, and the innkeeper hastened to assure him that he was always at his service. The young man continued to gorge himself on the meat with a satisfied look, making appetizing noises. At that moment, a violet-haired elven woman approached his table and, uttering, "I beg your pardon," made Luis look up questioningly. The elf girl asked Luis with a wide smile if the seat next to him was taken. The elfess informed with a smile that it didn't matter, it was just that one of their guild said she liked Luis. Her friend, blushing embarrassed, added that it was the first time she had ever liked someone. The elfess then suggested to Luis, if he didn't mind, to go for a drink with them. Luis, looking at them nonchalantly, asked how much they were going to pay him, much to the girl's puzzlement. Covering his face with his hand, he explained that he was paid to eat here, and wondered how much such a freak would pay him. Flashing his golden hair, the young man asked reproachfully if they had ever wondered how hard it was for him mentally. The elfess, shocked by his words, mumbled an apology, wondering why she wasn't sad. Instead, blushing, she admitted that it was she who should be ashamed of her boldness and attempt to speak to him, and that she felt like hiding and running away. With a cry of, "I'm sorry," the elfess rushed away and her friend stared after her confusedly while Louis watched the scene. Luis, sighing and continuing to eat his noodles, thought he was tired of his appearance and wondered if he was being too harsh. He reflected that if he didn't treat them that way, he would. The creepy image of the woman who'd asked him with a crazed look in her eyes if he'd enjoyed playing with her and why he'd winked at her then flashed through his mind. Luis, in flashbacks, hilariously excused himself that it wasn't true, and he'd just gotten dust in his eyes that time, while the woman screamed why he'd acted like he wanted a child with her. However, despite these unpleasant memories, a radiant smile appeared on Luis's face. He thought with delight that it was exciting, and as expected, being beautiful was the best. The young man continued his musings on the fact that simply because of his attractiveness, the People want to know where he goes to eat and look at him adoringly in the tavern. They are curious about the clothes he chooses, and they watch him admiringly in the store. They strive to emulate him in whatever he does. That's exactly what was happening. An orc and two boys followed him, bragging that they had bought the same clothes and dagger. Two residents, a boy and a girl, begged Lord Lewis to shake hands with them, calling it a lifelong dream, but he coldly refused. The boy clutched at Luis's pants in desperation, sobbing and begging him not to be like this, to which he irritably demanded that his clothes be released. Luis looked thoughtfully into the distance, pondering whether such a life could really be interesting. At that moment, three girls approached him, and one of them, a warrior with dark hair, addressed him as God-given handsome Louis, clarifying if that was his nickname. She continued that she had been thinking about him and realized that he was an interesting guy. After all, he had even declined an invitation to the imperial city because of his looks, after which she bluntly asked if he was stupid. The girl added that this was what made him even more attractive and interesting in her eyes, while Lewis looked at her. She then suggested that they forget about what had happened earlier and just have a drink together, but Luis turned away and asked who she was. The warrior was stunned, and Luis wondered if she had come to shake his hand too, adding that it was annoying and suggested she come another time. Glittering her eyes, the girl hissed defiantly that she wouldn't forget it. She let out a loud "Ha!" expressing her indignation and determination. Glittering scarlet eyes and clenching her fist, the warrioress uttered, "So this is what you choose." She screamed in rage, "You piece of shit! I'm really angry right now! How dare you! You want to die?" A muscular man with ponytails and a glowing eye suddenly appeared, declaring, "The only one who can kill me is Louis." The warrior woman, sweating, looked at the unexpected protector with surprise and slight consternation. The man with the glowing eye added menacingly, "Don't cling to my appa and get lost." The three girls, including the warrior, backed away fearfully under the pressure of the imposing bodyguard. While Luis looked away, the big man determinedly led the annoyed warrior away. The girl, still seething with anger, thought, "Then, if I don't get him..." She mentally finished the sentence. "Then no one gets any." While in the background, the big guy was asking Luis how much he could lift. Luis looked askance at his companion, thinking, "Appa, asking a lady how much she can lift is..." Under the cover of night, two dark figures watched Luis's house. Meanwhile, Luis slept serenely, unaware that outside the window the two were discussing his appearance, questioning whether they themselves were better. One of the bald, scarred thugs gloatingly suggested that his partner just kill Luis. The female warrior and her friends were watching, and one of the men asked if she would go out with him if they killed Luis, to which she smilingly agreed. Her companions hesitated, however, and one of them questioned whether it was really necessary to go that far, while another suggested just walking away. With glaring red eyes, the warrior ordered them to stay out of the way if they weren't going to help, because if he didn't get her, then she would kill him so no one else would have him, while her friends were terrified and thought she had lost her mind. The girl cheerfully announced that they would deal with it quickly, but immediately listened in surprise to some sound. Suddenly, she saw that the two thugs she had hired were both defeated and lying in pools of blood, and she muttered confusedly, "Oh, brothers?" Loud thuds made the warrior flinch and turn around fearfully. The warrior looked at her defeated friends lying on the ground in bewilderment and asked herself what was going on. She gripped the dagger tighter in her hand, her face expressing a mixture of fear and determination. Suddenly, a dark figure with a glowing red eye appeared behind her back, holding a blade to her throat and asking if it was hers. The warrior, covered in a cold sweat of terror, thought how quickly it had happened and that she hadn't even felt her attacker approaching. She pondered in amazement where someone with such a level of skill could come from in such a remote village, and demanded an answer as to who she was and why she was doing this. Suddenly, her gaze stopped on the glowing red eye of her attacker, and she was startled to guess who was in front of her. The purple-haired girl, Violet, held a dagger at the throat of the warrior, who in shock finally recognized her. The warrior asked Violet desperately why she was doing this to her, begging her to explain the reason. Violet jerked her arm sharply, and the warrior let out a shriek of pain. Violet said with an icy expression and a wickedly glowing eye, "Dearie, flowers are only to be admired." Violet, with a glowing eye, angrily questioned the warrior, how dare she try to pick the flower? The reflection of her sinister eye reveals a silhouette with a dagger, and she advises that in the next life she will only admire the flowers without touching them, while the captive whispers pleas for salvation. Meanwhile, Luis, unsuspecting, lets out a low moan in his sleep as he lies in his bed. Morning comes, sunlight floods the village and the castle visible in the distance, and the chirping of birds can be heard all around. The young man, yawning, walks out of the house where he is greeted by Violet, wishing him a good morning with a smile and noting his early rise. He addresses the girl by name, and she looks at him with a faint smile as he assumes she's doing flowers again. Luis wonders with some bewilderment if she hadn't watered the flower beds yesterday, watching the watering can in her hands. Violet explains that the flowers almost died last night, and in the background of her words, a hand is seen reaching out of the ground, causing the young man to give a surprised, "Ah!" The girl then asks when he plans to go to the village again, and worries about what will happen if they run out of money. Sitting on the grass, Luis replies that he doesn't want to do it, finding work too much of a hassle, while Violet suggests he try working for fun if he's bored. Luis, lying relaxed on the grass, declares his intention to continue such a carefree life without work forever, be it 10 or 20 years. A month has passed, and the tavern sign swayed slightly in the wind. The young man looks anxiously at the deserted street, where dark silhouettes can be seen, and regrets going into the village at all, marveling at the sparseness. He recalls the innkeeper's warning about an epidemic in a neighboring village, and anxiously speculates whether this is what it was about. Luis, breathing heavily and covered in spots, lies in bed, realizing that he too has not escaped the disease. Violet looks at him sadly, pronouncing it all so pointless. The girl cries, lamenting that he is still so young and handsome and could have enjoyed life to a ripe old age. Luis, struggling to breathe, whispers that it's terribly unfair to die like this and looks for confirmation of his words. With tears in his eyes, the young man confesses that he absolutely does not want to die. Violet is desperate, with her eyes glowing red and surrounded by blobs, screaming, "Lord Lewis!" All of a sudden, descendant of black magic, special ability, death resistance appears. The moon shines brightly through the tree crowns, illuminating the night sky. Luis, coming to under the cover of night, wonders if it was a dream and complains of a headache. He stretches, exclaiming that it was a terrible dream, and confidently declares that there is no way he could have died. The young man then decides to take a look at his beautiful face after a sound sleep, pulling out a dagger. Looking at the blade, he notes the glint blinding his eyes. A skull appears in the reflection of the dagger, and Luis asks in bewilderment who it is. A close-up of the skull in the reflection causes him to look even more amazed and ask, "What the hell?" Luis looks at his bony arms and body in horror, exclaiming why he has become a skeleton. A character card appears in front of him. Skeleton Soldier Luis, Level 1, no profession, title Bastard, with minimal stats. 46, rank a Knights appears on the screen, and their armor-clad legs can be seen below, striding resolutely forward. These knights took part in a raid to take over the dungeon, and the image shows a fierce battle. However, total annihilation awaited them, and only defeated bodies were left lying on the ground. One of the helmeted knights with a tear on his cheek says that the boss of this dungeon is someone that even S-ranked knights have a hard time dealing with. This boss turns out to be the Lord of Shadows, the black dragon Atrox, whose enormous figure towers over the fallen warriors. The knight in profile utters anxiously, "That's what I heard." Suddenly the situation changes. A pink heart appears above the dragon's head, and the knight exclaims in bewilderment, "What the hell is going on here?" Luis, standing in front of the dragon, strokes its face with a smile and asks, "Haha, do you like me that much?" Hearts appear in the dragon's eyes, and he noisily lets out steam from his nostrils, expressing his doting. The dragon then begins to ride on his back, and the stunned knight shouts, "The black dragon is riding on his back!" The leader of the mercenary group, watching the scene, noted with satisfaction that Luis was indeed worth every penny spent on him. He said thoughtfully, turning to his subordinates, that he thought it was impossible, but even the black dragon submitted. One of his helmeted companions confirmed that in 30 years of hunting, he had never seen anything like it while Luis stroked the dragon, asking if it liked the treatment. The squad leader pondered over the magic, recognizing that even the most powerful spells would not be able to subdue the black dragon so easily. Looking at Luis and the subdued beast, he concluded that this was something more noble and powerful than sorcery. Luis's stunning beauty came to the forefront, shining through his attractiveness. The leader of the mercenaries, along with his companions, finally realized that it was all about the young man's appearance. The dragon wagged its tail happily in front of Luis's silhouette, confirming that being beautiful was definitely an advantage. Luis explained with a smile that he was still being paid at the S-rank mercenary rate, and all he had to do was just show his face. Laughing and slightly sweating from the dragon's enthusiasm, he thought that if looks alone were enough, he could easily enjoy wealth and honor. Luis, now a skeleton, lay on the ground in the woods, perplexed. "Huh?" he said. 3 goblins suddenly appeared, and one of them rudely asked what the hell the skeleton was doing in their territory. The same goblin stated with disgust that Luis looked absolutely vile. Luis the skeleton looked at them silently as the butterfly landed on his skull. He thought in a panic that this couldn't be true, that he, the skeleton, was definitely a dream. He then reasoned that if this wasn't a dream, then goblins shouldn't be here, since they were usually only found in dungeons. Luis the skeleton began to run away rapidly, perplexed as to why he was fleeing at all. Turning to the goblins pursuing him, he proudly proclaimed, "I am the great Luis." Clenching his bony fist, he asked defiantly if they thought he would break down over such a small thing. As he continued to run away from the goblins, Luis the skeleton was determined that he would survive at all costs. Luis the skeleton, clutching his dagger, thought that no matter how badly he fought, a pair of goblins would be easy to deal with. However, he immediately collapsed to the ground under the blows of the batons of the enraged goblins. With his skull cracked, he realized with horror, "I forgot." The goblins began to beat him with their feet, and Luis shouted, "Ah, wait! Those are my bones!" because he'd never been in a fight before. Great Luis, whose head was being stomped on by a goblin, couldn't believe he was being humiliated like this by some small creature. Suddenly, he himself appeared before his mind's eye, a young, handsome man with a determined look and shining eyes. The goblin seemed to stiffen for a moment, sensing some change and glancing around nervously. Then a confident smirk appeared on the face of his imaginary self, accompanied by a quiet, "Humph." He remembered how he once thought they were just goblins, standing shoulder to shoulder with mighty allies against the horde. But the reality was cruel. The goblins kept kicking him, and he begged them to stop, for his bones looked utterly disgusting. Suddenly, a bright blue magic projectile swept through the darkness. The goblin, swinging his club, looked up in surprise when something hit him in the head. A mighty warrior in armor and helmet brought his sword down on another goblin. Luis the skeleton in a dark cloak lay on the ground, surrounded by a red glow. A close-up of his skull expressed bewilderment at what was happening. 3 strangers, a warrior and 2 girls, bent over him, and the knight pronounced that they seemed to be too late to devour him, leaving not a piece of flesh from those cruel bastards. The warrior continued to philosophize about a world where the weak become prey, and only the strong survive, while Luis thought he couldn't get up because of the pain. Luis the skeleton lifted himself up and thanked his saviors while the girl offered to honor the fallen. The skeleton shouted loudly and offered them lunch together as a thank you for saving them. A sharp, dark bang swept across the screen, causing Luis to whine and someone to snicker puzzledly. The warrior exclaimed that he had never heard of a talking skeleton, assuming it was a demon, and offered to inform the villagers who were already scattering. Luis the skeleton, buried up to his neck with a bottle on his head, pondered how he had gotten to this life among monsters and humans, and decided he needed to go home first. Clad in a cloak, he stood in the middle of the scorched landscape under a purple sky, perplexed as to why the village looked like this. As he made his way through the desolate area, he wondered if this was a dream, and if the epidemic was the cause of it all. Seeing the wilted flower, Luis the skeleton wondered what causes plants to die. As he approached the familiar structure, he noted that Violet's house remained the same. His skull was frozen in a pensive or perhaps slightly sinister expression. The door of the house creaked open slightly, inviting entry. Entering the dark room, Luis smelled the odor of alcohol and wondered if anyone lived here. He thought Violet was not drinking, and at that moment a dark figure with an ominously glowing red eye appeared behind him. The figure clutched a dagger in his hand, preparing for something. Violet, with glowing eyes, swiftly attacked Luis the skeleton, who let out a scream. Luis was startled to recognize Violet, perplexed as to why she looked like that. The girl, looking utterly defeated, gave him a crushing blow. The skeleton flew backwards, continuing to scream in surprise and pain. Violet easily repelled Louis's bony arm with her blade. As he fell to the floor, the young man thought with despair that Violet would not recognize him. A girl with purple hair and eyes burning scarlet stood over him, and he wondered why she had become so fierce and what had happened in his absence. Louise the skeleton tried to call out to her, saying her name and asking her to wait. A drop of something glowing fell to the floor, and Violet looked down in surprise. Violet, clutching the skeleton's shoulder tightly, asks suspiciously who he is. Wrapping her arms around him from behind, the girl is perplexed as to how a monster can behave like a human, and why he addresses her as if they know each other. Louis the skeleton is desperately trying to shout to her, assuring her, "Violet, it's me." Her pupil narrows in amazement as she hears him exclaim, "It's Louis!" Pressed against her, Louis the skeleton admits that he doesn't realize how he turned into a skeleton, and that when he woke up, he was already one. The young man's skull emits a confused, "Eh?" Violet, with glittering eyes, sharply pushes Louis the skeleton away from her, who shrieks in surprise. Receiving a tangible jolt, Louis the skeleton lets out a painful groan. The girl grabs Louis the skeleton by the skull, looking at him questioningly. Violet, with a crazed look and burning scarlet eyes, slides her dagger over the skeleton Louis pinned to the floor. Violet, with sparkling scarlet eyes, angrily questioned how dare he imitate him and threatened to turn him into powder. Louis the skeleton, covered in vapor, shouted desperately, "Wait, Violet, it's me, Louis!" Her hand, clutching the dagger tightly, froze in readiness to strike. The girl swung at the skull with a crazed look, shouting out, "It's a flower!" In flashbacks, Louis, still being human, asked Violet to be careful as she smilingly watered the flowers, saying they were in full bloom. The young man had been perplexed in the past as to why she called him Flower and asked about his clothes, and Violet wondered with a smile if he was going to squash flower pots, adding that the more of them, the better. Violet confirmed in reminiscence with a gentle smile. "That's right." She explained with a radiant smile that it was because he was as beautiful as a flower. Louis the human, smiling embarrassedly, thought that the nickname Flower wasn't so bad. In the present tense, a glowing drop fell on Louis the skeleton's skull as he pondered. Violet's dagger froze dangerously close to Louis's skull, who stared in horror at the glistening blade. Pressed against the girl, Louis the skeleton whispered with hope in his voice, "Violet?" Violet's face contorted in disbelief. A tear slowly rolled down her cheek, and she barely audibly said, "Is it really—" The girl, flooded with tears and surrounded by glowing droplets, asked with desperation in her voice, "Is it really you?" Violet hugged Louis the skeleton lying on the floor tightly and confessed, "I missed you so much." The dark silhouettes of the treetops could be seen against the colorful sunset. Looking somewhere off to the side, Violet said quietly that a lot had happened in the year Louis had been gone. Louis the skeleton realized the bitter truth with amazement, "So I've been dead for a year." Sitting with his back to Violet, he asked why she was talking like that, to which she replied that she was still trying to get used to his new look. Louis the skeleton, hugging Violet and dropping bone tears, admitted that he was in a lot of pain, and an ominous demon-appeared sign appeared at the bottom. Louis the skeleton looks in horror at Violet, who also looks terrified, and exclaims, "What? A demon?" Violet explains that war has broken out because of the demons, and some kingdoms have already fallen, with their house shown in the background at sunset. She continues that she couldn't leave this place full of memories of Louis, with the backdrop of their house flooded with bright lights. Violet ends her story by saying that then he appeared, and Louis Skeleton realizes why the goblins were near the village. Louis the Skeleton says Violet's name thoughtfully. Leaning against her, he wonders wistfully if he will ever regain his former appearance. Violet reassures him with a smile, saying, "Don't worry, Louis." Her face lights up with a confident smile and she exclaims, "I know." Violet enthusiastically declares that she knows how to give Louis back his old face while he looks at her. Two dark figures, Louis and Violet, stand on the edge of a cliff, looking out at the world stretching out before them under a cloudy sky. Louis the Skeleton, standing on the cliff next to Violet, declares emphatically that he will do whatever it takes to regain his former appearance. He turns to the girl and wonders if she would follow him, even knowing the possible danger. Violet, clasping her hands together in front of her, replies firmly, "Yes!" With a smile, she adds that her job is to water the flowers. Louis the Skeleton, with a wide grin on his skull, utters, "Okay then." He proposes that Violet go on a quest together to find his lost beauty. An image of a glowing regeneration potion and an open book appears on the screen with the caption that it instantly regenerates flesh. A picture is then shown with red spider legs as one of the ingredients. A blue lizard tail, also needed for the potion, is shown next. The last ingredient turns out to be the blood of a green deer poured into a vial. A hand clutched a dagger, and the inscription said, "You are the last ingredient." In front of the skeleton, Luis, who stood on the shore, the Leviathan Lake Lord, a huge monster with glowing eyes, towered in front of him. The cloaked skeleton, clutching a dagger, shouted defiantly to the sea serpent, "Come on!" Luis the skeleton boldly called Leviathan an ugly fish bastard, which infuriated him. The monster, stunned by such insolence, growled perplexedly as to what the hell was going on and what this madman was doing. Leviathan pondered as he looked at the tiny skeleton that it looked like it could be crushed at any moment and whether it had any plan at all. Luis the skeleton, laughing loudly, mockingly asked the monster if he was scared. Leviathan's eye flashed a fierce blue light as he glared at his opponent. The sea serpent lunged at Luis with a roar, opening its mouth wide, and the skeleton seemed to be just waiting for that, exclaiming, "Gotcha!" At the decisive moment, while holding the dagger, Luis the skeleton loudly shouted the name Violet. Violet, armed with 2 daggers, swiftly attacked Leviathan from the air, while Luis the skeleton was below. Her purple-haired face expressed complete focus, and her eyes burned with determination as she clutched her blades. The sea monster realized the catch with horror, muttering, "Damn," as it looked at the girl flying towards it. Leviathan's eyes reflected realization. He tricked me. Scarlet splashes against the sunset sky marked a successful hit. Later, Louis the skeleton and Violet were standing under the shade of flowering rose trees, and the girl was holding a vial. It was a regeneration potion, a mystical elixir that healed wounds and was blessed by an angel. Looking at Violet from above, Louis the skeleton heard her say that the potion only worked amongst the cherry blossoms, and it was very romantic. The girl with burning eyes suggested, "Shall we try it?" But Louis the skeleton asked her to hold off for a while. Violet resolutely made an incision in her palm, and drops of her blood fell downward. Louis the skeleton asked Violet in bewilderment what she was doing, to which the girl replied that she would test the potion on herself first for backup. Her hand gently tilted the vial, and a few drops of elixir fell onto her injured palm amidst a blinding glow. The life-giving moisture touched the wound on her skin, causing an instant reaction and a flash of light. The girl was enveloped in a bright, transforming glow, her hair whipping up as Luis the skeleton watched this miracle. The young man's skull opened in amazement, and he let out an exclamation of, "Oh!" amazed at what he saw. Violet held out the vial to Luis the skeleton with a reassuring smile, offering him now to try the elixir while he mumbled confusedly. The skeleton tentatively held the vial of scarlet potion in his bony hands, examining it against the backdrop of blooming sakura trees. He excitedly addressed the girl by name, and she responded with a soft smile. "Yes?" Half of his face miraculously regained its former human appearance, and the young man pronounced that without it, he would be nothing. Violet's eyes opened wide with amazement and joy when Louis thanked her profusely. Louis's bony hand opened the potion vial, and a bright glow burst from the neck. The skeleton held the vial of scarlet elixir to his skull with anticipation, preparing to drink it. Suddenly the words "all ended" appeared in front of the goblin's angry face. Then the phrase "no beauty" appeared above the scene where the 3 saviors once stood over his defeated body. The words "or destroy" and "my pitched life" came through amidst the memory of a skull buried up to the neck with a bottle. Luis the skeleton, dropping glowing tears, thought with despair, "If I could go back." He exclaimed bitterly, "I'd live like a real tomboy." And at that moment the vial of potion shattered against his skull, dousing him with its contents. The lush crowns of cherry blossom trees spread out against the soft orange sunset sky. The remains of Luis Skeleton's cloak and bones began to dissolve into a puddle of bubbling substance on the ground. Violet cried out in horror, "Lord Luis!" looking at what was happening as he let out a low moan. Luis the skeleton, embraced by the green glow from the potion, wondered in panic what was going on. Violet watched his transformation with alarm and consternation. The girl tried to calm a flailing Luis, whose skull was beginning to crack, begging him to come to his senses. A close-up of the skeleton's skull expressed extreme bewilderment at her words, "Calm down." Against the backdrop of blossoming trees, he asked with despair if he looked like he was calm and why he wasn't returning to normal. Looking at the puddle where his bones were dissolving, the young man wondered if he would have to live like this forever and why he wasn't regenerating. His skull, shown very close up, expressed all the horror of the realization, and he was screaming what he had done wrong. Falling to his knees in front of Violet and covering his face with his bony hands, Luis asked longingly if he couldn't go back. A despairing conclusion flashed through his thoughts that there was no point in living then. With his arms wrapped around himself in utter despair, the skeleton wondered if he couldn't just die. Violet looked at the desperate Luis the skeleton with a grim expression and a barely perceptible chuckle. The girl, surrounded by scarlet glow and petals, held out her hand to Luis, assuring him that there must be another way. The young skeleton man was standing next to Violet, who was gazing pensively into the distance against a backdrop of flowering trees. With her back turned to Luis, she clutched the dagger in her hand, mouthing his name. Violet, with a determined look, holding 2 blades in her hands, ordered the skeleton to run as far away as possible, to which the skeleton interjected in surprise. Suddenly, the image of a creature with red hair and a horn appeared before them, shrouded in an ominous aura. A close-up of his burning red eyes and sharp dagger-like fangs was shown. The girl, with a drop of sweat on her temple, confidently stated that there was no mistake in that aura while Luis the skeleton looked at her. A huge dark figure with blazing scarlet eyes stood before them, and Violet stated that it was the Demon King. She informed Luis the skeleton with a firm expression that she would try to buy some time for him to escape, then turned to the monster that had appeared. Luis the skeleton, standing next to Violet, turned to the Demon King, assuming his incredible strength, and asked for a favor. The skull of a young man in close-up uttered his request, "Kill me." The Demon King noted with a smirk that asking for assassination while already dead was quite interesting. He added that Luis the skeleton, whose bones glowed purple, was neither alive nor dead, presenting a truly bizarre existence. The Demon Lord, with a devilish smile, agreed to fulfill his wish and kill him. Luis the skeleton, looking at the Demon King's clawed paw approaching, thought that it was quite enough. His skull expressed with grim determination that if he couldn't go back, it was better to die. Suddenly, Violet turned apologetically to Lord Louis, pushing him aside. Luis the skeleton looked at her in bewilderment, not realizing what was going on. The girl sharply pushed the skeleton away, who flew aside with a wave of her hand. Violet, with a determined look, begged Lord Louis to stay alive, and not to forget that there were people who still... The girl finished the sentence with a smile, saying that there were those who wanted to protect him. Her eyes burned with determination, while the Demon King looked at her with an anticipatory grin. Violet crossed her dagger with the Demon King's claw, surrounded by an ominous purple aura. The girl with glowing scarlet eyes and 2 blades rushed to attack the Demon Lord, who answered her with streams of dark energy. The Demon King's chest showed a bleeding wound from her blow. Violet stood unwavering while the monster's huge shadowy foot hovered over her. A close-up of the Demon Lord's razor-sharp claws appeared. The Demon King, slightly wounded but still formidable, looked down at her. A mocking "Ha!" escaped his lips, expressing surprise and anger. The Demon King let out a loud laughter as he spread his wings, violet energy raging around him. He announced with a smirk that he would fight in earnest now, activating the Lucifer's Eye Awakening. Violet looked up at the Demon Lord floating in the air and shrouded in purple flames, ready to attack. The girl with a tense face noted to herself the speed of her opponent and decided to defend herself first. The Demon King swiftly attacked Violet, who tried to parry the blow with her dagger, surrounded by a purple aura. The Demon Lord stated that his Lucifer eyes could see through the essence and blocking his attacks was useless. A powerful stream of purple energy swept downward, raising a cloud of dust and debris. Blood spatters could be seen on the dark background, symbolizing the ferocity of the fight. A close-up of the Demon King's face was shown, with a trickle of blood running down it and his eye glowing ominously. The Demon Lord licked his lips and looked at something with interest, his eyes burning with different light. The Demon King noted that it was a completely unexpected attack as Violet fought off the purple energy strike. The Demon Lord was surprised to find that she not only dodged, but also managed to counterattack. The demonic creature was struck by a glowing blade that stabbed straight into its chest. The Demon King, impressed, declared to Violet that he liked her and offered to become his subordinate, while the girl looked at him resolutely. He then inquired why a strong woman like her would risk her life for some skeleton. Violet, with a bloodshot eye and a barely perceptible smile, replied that she had made a promise to water the flowers, and the Demon Lord had called her a demon possessed with a lust for killing. The Demon King said thoughtfully that someone like her couldn't understand the feeling of losing something precious, adding that it reminded him of something he didn't want to remember. Glaring with his eyes, the Demon Lord coldly ordered her to simply die. 2 frames showed Violet's face, first determined, then expressing slight pain and humility. Her eyes went wide with horror or furious protest, and she shouted loudly, "No!" Louis the skeleton, holding a dagger, appeared behind Violet, who was lying on the ground wondering if it was Lord Louis. The girl raised herself and asked Louis the skeleton in amazement why he had come back, to which he replied that he did not know, for he had nothing to lose. The Demon King covered his face with his hand and asked perplexedly what this strange light was. His eye, in which something was reflected, was shown in close-up, and he said, "You..." The Demon Lord was perplexed and asked why he was seeing through Lucifer's eyes. His eyes reflected Louis in human form beside Violet. The young man was saying that the flowers were dying without rain, and the girl wondered if he was worried about her. The ominous castle of the Demon King appeared on the screen, floating in the night sky under the sickle moon. Inside the castle, a winged demon guard angrily exclaimed that demons seeking peace was absurd, while another tried to calm him down. A duck-clothed man approached them, and the guard turned around and asked what the commotion was about, addressing her, "O Elder." Hands held a glowing crystal orb, and the voiceover said that as a demon, he didn't understand why the Demon King wasn't attacking humans, and that they were monitoring everything through the orb, wondering what the problem was. An elder duck with demonic horns grimly stated that this was exactly the problem, to which another demon interjected in surprise. She explained that the Demon King had lost her head to love a human, causing her interlocutor to wonder how such a thing was even possible. The elder invited him to look around, pointing to a wall hung with portraits of Louis, and stated that everything here was connected to him. When the demon suggested whether it was magic, the duck with angel wings and horns objected that it was not sorcery. She continued that in her homeland, this behavior of the Demon King, who swallowed nervously, is called a certain way. Duck solemnly announced the word fandom, and at this moment the Demon King adoringly hugged the smiling Louis. A close-up showed the Demon King's clawed feet rushing forward. Suddenly, the Demon King tightly hugged Louis the skeleton from the back, causing Violet to watch this scene in surprise. The Demon King, brimming with tears, exclaimed with feeling, "I missed you so much, Lord Louis." Louis the skeleton, finding himself in the Demon King's embrace with a drop of sweat on his skull, confusedly let out a "huh." For hundreds of years, there were only 10 Demon Kings, and the current ruler was one of them. This winged demoness with glowing scarlet eyes and a clenched fist radiated incredible power. Her name was Atrox, the Black Dragon, and she looked forward with a confident smile. As long as Atrox, the Black Dragon, exists, the doom of mankind is only a matter of time, ancient wisdom said. The Demon Queen, in floods of tears, desperately cried out, "Lord Louis, I want to see you." Louis the skeleton, still in her embrace, with a drop of sweat on his skull, perplexedly said, "Huh?" Atrox, wiping away a tear, said sympathetically that she understood now, and he must have had a hard time. Violet looked at Louis the skeleton in amazement, puzzled as to how he could have ended up in such a useless and completely unattractive skeleton form. Louis's skull turned slightly, and he thought, "This rascal?" Atrox, standing among the cherry blossoms, addressed him, telling him that he was looking for his body and assured him not to worry. Atrox excitedly declared that she would accompany him to help him regain his former beauty. Violet, pointing at the demoness, worriedly warned Lord Louis that she could not be trusted, because she was a demon. Louis the skeleton, with a serious look, asked Atrox if she really wanted to help him find his body. The Demon Queen, surrounded by ominous shadows, explained that she agreed since there were many dangers lurking in the human world. Atrox, looking thoughtfully away at the backdrop of flowering trees, added, "And..." Violet exclaimed indignantly that the little man was too weak to protect him, and asked perplexed, "What?" A girl with purple hair, whose boots stood firmly on the ground, declared that she was the one here to protect the flowers. Violet added confidently that Louis was protecting her life, and the skeleton beside her nodded in agreement. Atrox, puckering her lips and baring her fangs, snickered at the woman for not making her laugh. The Demon Queen, with fury in her burning eyes, asked Violet why she let Louis die then. Violet, with a drop of sweat on her temple and her eyes wide open, muttered, that... Atrox, turning to Louis the skeleton, said she realized how hard it was for him to still trust her. The demon queen, blushing and coquettishly fixing her hair, suggested, "Then how about—" Atrox, surrounded by pink hearts and smiling embarrassedly, offered him a contract to become her master. Louis the Skeleton interjected with bewilderment and a question mark above his head. "Contract?" Violet's face darkened with anger, and she repeated with menace in her voice, "Master?" A serene blue sky with light white clouds spread out above them. A cute blue rabbit with a carrot in his teeth hopped merrily down the forest path. Suddenly, a powerful pillar of purple energy erupted from the ground, throwing the unfortunate rabbit and its carrot high into the air. An ancient scroll labeled the Demonic Pact appeared, a contract putting lives on the line, where Atrox pledged to accompany Luis until his form was restored, and the penalty for breach was the destruction of his soul, stating the parties, Luis and the Black Dragon Atrox. Atrox enthusiastically informs Lord Luis that a pact has been made, and she will do whatever she can to help him, while Violet clenches her fists in anger, and Luis the Skeleton tries to remember the demoness's name. The demoness introduces herself as Black Dragon Atrox with a smile, and Luis the Skeleton, scratching his skull, notes that Black Dragon At is too long. Luis the Skeleton suggests changing Atrox's name as her full name is too difficult to pronounce, to which the demoness surprisingly quibbles over whether to change her name. The young skeleton boy puts his hand to his chin, reasoning that though she is a demon, she is a kind dragon who is helping him, and his jaws make a clacking sound. Luis the Skeleton offers to call her Dracosia, which causes Atrox, whose eyes glaze over, to look shocked and ask, "Dracosia?" It is explained that the dragons have a family heirloom passed down from generation to generation, and the image shows 3 powerful dragons, a female, a golden dragon, and a fire dragon. Atrox, shrouded in a dark aura and trembling with mixed feelings, humbly utters, "My name is Dracosia," recognizing herself as a good demon. The demoness, with eyes burning with delight and a blush on her cheeks, asks if that sounds cute. Dracosia bounces happily, exclaiming that Lord Louis is the best while he laughs, and Violet stands nearby, with Louis the Skeleton wondering what they should do now. Violet, with her purple hair gathered into a ponytail, pouts her lips unhappily as she watches this scene against the backdrop of the flowering trees. Violet, wearing a hooded cloak and pointing into the distance, cheered Luis on, reporting that they had almost reached the village while Dracosia shivered in the heat. Luis the Skeleton close-up complained that it was very hot and he felt like he was dying. The girl anxiously asked Lord Louis if he was all right, to which he irritably replied, "Didn't it show that he wasn't?" She clarified, meaning if everything was okay with that brat, referring to the heavy breathing from the heat of the Dracosia in the background. The demoness, pouring sweat and flashing red eyes, pondered that demons killed people for fun. This place was like hell, and there was no telling what Violet was up to. The young skeleton boy held out his hand to Violet, explaining that he was just concerned that they were traveling with a demon. Violet received a light slap on the forehead from him and gave a short shriek of surprise. Luis the Skeleton asked Violet to listen, stating that he didn't care if it was human or demon. If they were willing to help him find his body, he was fine with that. He added that from the moment he turned into a skeleton, every day was like a living hell. The young skeleton man told Violet that he understood her worry, but asked her not to worry too much, while Dracosia and the smaller desert creatures followed behind them. Luis the Skeleton reminded Violet that she was here to help him, so there was no need to worry, and suggested moving on. The hooded girl thought, how could she be so shameless? After all, he was the one always helping her. Pushing some desert creature away with his foot, the young skeleton man resented how dare it block his path, and Violet reflected that if she could not believe in Luis. With a determined smile, the girl thought, who would believe in him then? The dragoness with burning eyes and fangs angrily asked Violet why she would let Luis die in such a case. Violet, with a drop of sweat on her temple and a confused expression, muttered, that... A close-up of her determined eye reflected the thought that she would no longer let him die. With a confident smile, Violet declared that she would protect him as she protected the flowers while Louis the Skeleton, adjusting his hood, thought about the speedy return of his handsome face. 2 figures with masks hiding their faces stared forward with a sinister look. A pair of travelers stood at the entrance to a cave with the inscription Arcanis visible above it. Inside the cave of Arcanis, flooded with blue light, ruins and many dark figures could be seen, with one glowing silhouette standing out among them. A dragoness with burning scarlet eyes and hooded eyes walked past a crying old man begging for alms. The hooded Violet walked past two suspicious thugs, one of whom was wearing a mask. Louis the skeleton in the hooded cloak clenched his fist, ready to be tested. Violet warned Louis that the place was dangerous and asked him not to stray too far from her. Dracosia grinned, noting that Violet, knowing the danger, had brought Louis here anyway, calling it pathetic. The demoness motioned for Louis to approach her, promising protection, but he shied away, complaining about the heat coming from her. Violet sharply reminded Dracosia that they were here for the search for Louis's body and demanded to watch her tongue, to which the skeleton exclaimed in surprise. Louis praised Violet and asked if she had any plan, while Dracosia looked confused and a thank you note appeared below. The dragoness looked at Violet in bewilderment, waiting for an answer or further instructions. Violet was watching with a sly grin and a LOL look on her face. The dragoness with glittering scarlet eyes and sharp fangs looked furious. Violet showed her tongue to Dracosia, who yelled out if she was being bullied while Louis the skeleton stood nearby, tapping his fingers. A stone sign reading Tavern, Inn, hung from chains. Louis the skeleton, sighing, said it was late and time to rest, adding that there were 2 rooms. Dracosia and Louis the skeleton headed towards the rooms, and Violet looked on in surprise. The horned dragoness with a sly smile looked at Louis the skeleton, a question mark appearing above his head. The demoness with burning eyes asked Louis if she could share a room with him, since there were only 2 of them. Violet indignantly asked Dracosia what she was doing and why she was pushing Louis. The purple-haired girl stated that she would share a room with him, and Dracosia grabbed her by the hair and ordered her to stop. The dragoness declared with sparkling eyes that she would be the one to sleep with him, and Violet objected. How could she let a demon sleep with him? Louis the skeleton sighed and shook his head, turning away from their argument. Dracosia and Violet were sitting on the bed with their backs to each other, arms crossed and looking unhappily in different directions. The demoness with burning scarlet eyes muttered to herself, "Fuck off!" Violet looked at her sternly and told her not to swear, for it was bad. Dracosia replied with a chuckle that she was originally a bad demon, so it was fine. The demoness tisked in annoyance that if it wasn't for Violet, she could have slept in the same room with him, to which the girl gave a surprised, "Ah," adding that as long as she was here, that wouldn't be allowed. The dragoness, shrouded in an ominous aura and with glowing eyes, asked threateningly, since when did she need Violet's permission? Violet, also with glowing eyes and clutching her dagger, stated firmly that she still wouldn't let that happen. A fierce battle ensued between Dracosia and Violet, accompanied by bursts of energy and collisions. Violet delivered a powerful kick to Dracosia's body, sending her flying backwards. The violet-haired girl, having received a scratch on her cheek from which a drop of blood was dripping down, looked at her opponent with determination. The demoness, also with a battle mark on her face, smirked gloatingly, surrounded by a pink aura. Their collision sent cracks across the room, as if invisible glass had shattered. After a powerful blow destroyed part of the wall, Dracosia and Violet found themselves in the next room. The demoness looked in surprise at Violet, who let out a loud exclamation when she saw the picture. The breach showed a room where a man in a revealing outfit with pink ears and a collar was sitting on a bed, pointing his finger, and a laughing woman with cat ears, also wearing a collar, both wondering what was going on. The dragoness looked at Violet's hand, covering her face with her hand with a devilish grin, encouraging her to continue and adding that they respected her tastes. The violet-haired girl, blushing and sweating, couldn't hide her embarrassment at what she saw. Through a huge hole in the wall, Louis's room with the bed was visible, and someone asked perplexedly if it was his quarters. Dracosia and Violet ran into Louis's room, and the demoness anxiously asked if he was okay. Dracosia looked around and noted that he wasn't here, and wondered if he had gone out for a short walk. The demoness, clutching some kind of purple roll in her hand, shook her head negatively. Her eye narrowed sharply and she exclaimed, "Man, isn't that—" Violet, holding Louis's cloak and his bone in her hands, clarified if it was Lord Louis's bone and robe. The girl confidently stated that he wasn't the type to go outside without his cloak, and Draco stretched out questioningly. "Then," Violet said with a serious expression on her face, "Louis was—" On the split screen, Violet emphatically announced, "Kidnapped!" and Dracosia asked, "Kidnapped?" in horror. The violet-haired girl looked at the bone and cloak again, repeating the question as to whether these were the remains of Sir Louis. Violet concluded with grim certainty that there was no doubt, and Sir Louis, under the cover of night while the fox watched from a branch, a wagon pulled by a bone beast was carrying away the kidnapped Luis. Luis the skeleton inside the shaking wagon was sleepily blowing a bubble from his nose. Suddenly, the bone creature pulling the wagon collapsed to the ground with a rumble, falling apart. Dracosia, hovering next to Violet, mouthed, "Human," and the latter asked if the demoness had any idea where he might be. The demoness, pointing forward, confidently replied, "Over there." They saw an ominous structure in the center of the village, and Dracosia explained that it was the auction house. Violet asked in surprise about the auction house, not understanding what that had to do with it, and Draco explained that they sold absolutely everything there. A smirking masked auctioneer stood next to a golden statue, and it was explained that no one questioned the origin of the lots. The same auctioneer pointed to the bloody statue, emphasizing that it didn't matter if the item was stolen or taken away by force. A sack filled to the top with gold coins symbolized that anything would be put up for sale for profit. Violet asked anxiously if Lord Louis might be auctioned off, and Dracosia skeptically remarked that he was only a skeleton and looked completely useless. The girl with purple hair seriously replied that there were many more eccentric and crazy people in this world than she realized. Violet added with annoyance, looking at the demoness that here she was, having to travel with such a demon. Suddenly, the dragoness with burning scarlet eyes abruptly turned around, sensing danger. Her hand intercepted a flying arrow with a drop of blood dripping from its shaft. Violet and Dracosia looked warily in the direction the arrow had come from, and the girl asked loudly who was there. Two men appeared from the shadows, and one of them said with a smirk that it must have been a surprise attack, wondering how Dracosia not only dodged but caught the arrow. The two attackers, D-rank twin brothers Axe and Tra, appeared before the girls, and one of them stated that he already liked Dracosia. The brothers looked at each other in surprise, and one asked if the other liked the same thing. One of the brothers clarified if the one with purple hair was the one he was talking about, while Dracosia stared at them in bewilderment, and the second brother asked if she was the one the first one was talking about. One of the brothers remembered that their mom told them not to fight over the girl, and the other suggested they just kill her. They agreed that it was best since they were good sons and listened to mom. One introduced himself as X and the other, with a mad grin, as Tra. Violet swiftly attacked them both with her glowing blades, ordering them to die while memorizing their names. A girl with purple hair gathered into a ponytail calmly said, "Let's go." Dracosia, sitting on a defeated bandit, asked Violet what she was doing, since they could question them. Violet coldly replied that they were just extras who talked too much. Dracosia, standing over the bodies, admitted with a slight chuckle that she was thinking the same thing herself. The Arcanis auction house building loomed before them, illuminated by a dim light. An auctioneer with a mustache and a crazed look holding a microphone announced the next item, an item of underwear. The auctioneer solemnly announced that these were the underpants of the legendary warrior Drovok, the Dragon Slayer, showing them off to the public. The three judges, including the princess, were assessing the lot with varying emotions while the presenter told them that Drovok had worn them all his journey and they had withstood all the hardships. The auction host excitedly announced that Drovok's underpants had sold for 25 gold pieces and congratulated the winning bidder. Silhouetted assistants rolled the next items onto the stage, and the auctioneer thanked the audience for their patience as he prepared to introduce a new item. With a crazy smile and a twinkle in his eye, he prepared to announce the last and most intriguing item of the evening. The man presented a portrait of the incomparably handsome outlaw Louis with pathos, and a picture of him was displayed for all to see. A close-up portrait of Louis was shown with his hand covering his face, and it was reported that he was considered a divine masterpiece. The audience, including an elf and a woman, gazed at the painting in amazement and delight, while the text explained that even monsters could not resist his charms, and although his character was bad, it only added to his appeal. The auctioneer, standing with his back to the portrait covered with a cloth, asked the audience not to be too surprised because whoever buys this portrait. He abruptly tore off the veil, and before the astonished audience stood Louis' skeleton tied to a cross, and the announcer announced that the winner would also receive the real, deceased Louis himself. The auctioneer with the mustache, peering out from behind Louis's skeleton, asks the audience if they are really wondering if this is the real Louis. He then exclaims indignantly that of course not, idiots. They just found some random skeleton in a tavern and brought it here. With a sly grin, the auctioneer adds that no one will be able to prove otherwise, and they'll pull off two sales at once, a portrait and a skeleton. A man confidently declares, standing in front of a huge Y in a cart, that this skeleton is Luis and he guarantees it. Louis' skull, which appears to be asleep, is shown in close-up, and the auctioneer offers an idea of how it would decorate a house, adding that young people call it a figurine. The audience, including a man with glasses and a woman with a fan, listen as the announcer says that even though Luis is dead, he's right in front of them, a true exclusive that can't be found anywhere else unless someone resells it. The auctioneer excitedly announces that the starting bid is 100 gold. Among the crowd, where some even fell, shouts of bets of 300 and 500 are heard. Hands with plaques go up offering 600, and then the stakes skyrocket to 700 and 800. The auctioneer, gulping and slightly sweating, announces the current bid of 800 and asks in amazement if no one will give 1,000. A mysterious figure in a green hood raised a sign with a glowing circle, making a bid of 1,000 gold. The auctioneer shouted ecstatically that this was about to break their all-time record and asked if there were no more bids before he closed the bidding. Suddenly, the wooden sign of one of the bidders shattered into pieces from a powerful impact. The auction host, shrouded in a cloud of dust, cried out in horror, perplexed as to what was happening. Dracosia and Violet made a spectacular appearance, and the demoness menacingly asked the bastards where Sir Lewis was while the girl tisked at her rudeness. The demoness with burning scarlet eyes countered that she was a bad demon and didn't care, then wondered if Violet was even listening to her. Both girls looked up at the stage where the Y symbol and a small figure were visible, and Dracosia said, "Wait," and Violet gave a questioning look. A close-up showed Louis the skeleton tied to a cross on stage and the caption, "Sir Lewis." Violet shouted "Sir Lewis" and released a powerful blue energy beam towards the stage. The dragoness with blazing scarlet eyes also lunged forward, ready to fight, while the armored guard flew back from Violet's blow. The dragoness with sparkling scarlet eyes resolutely repelled the blow with her fists, causing shards to sprinkle. From above, a huge hulking man with a spiked mace swung up for a crushing blow. Violet swiftly spun from above, blocking the attack on Dracosia with her blade, and sparks sprinkled from the collision. A powerful explosion went off on stage, causing the auctioneer and his assistant to scream in horror. Two spectators watched in confusion, and one of them asked hopefully if the enemies were defeated, but the other warned him against jumping to conclusions. Through the smoke and sparks, the battle marks on Violet's chest could be seen, evidence of a heated fight. Dracosia grinned as she recognized the strength of her opponents, but immediately added that they were no match for her. Suddenly, her blazing scarlet eyes focused on something with surprise, and she muttered, "We human?" The demoness pointed out her injury to Violet, but she ignored it and urged her to focus on saving Sir Louis. The violet-haired girl's face expressed unwavering determination, and she warned her to keep her guard up. Violet noted that the place was filled with nobles and wealthy elite who came to bargain for rare items. The girl added that they had brought extremely powerful bodyguards with them, including mages, a battle monk, and knights. The dragoness, whom Violet mentally called Soyen, flinched slightly upon hearing her words. Wiping her cheek, Violet said with determination, turning to the demoness, "If you really care about Sir Louis," she asked firmly, "help me protect him." The demoness listened to her pleading pleas with burning eyes. The dragoness challengingly asked why she had to do that, much to Violet's surprise. With a sly smile, the demoness replied, "You will help me, Violet." As she approached the girl, Dragoness repeated her same request to help protect Sir Louis. Violet, looking at the silhouette of the demoness raising her hand, was relieved that there seemed to be no choice. Dracosia, hovering above Violet, suggested that they join forces since they had a common goal. A powerful red blow crashed to the ground, raising splinters and dust, and someone with a club flew aside. Violet, bleeding, repelled the attack of the opponent whose face expressed shock, and blue energy surged around them. A girl with purple hair surrounded by a blue glow created a magic circle. A bright column of blue lightning struck the cloaked figure, causing a powerful discharge. The hooded mage, struck by lightning, exclaimed in horror that it was impossible and wondered why. Dracosia and Violet stood unharmed, and the demoness wondered why her opponent wasn't hurt, and the girl noted a slight tingling sensation. The auctioneer with the mustache shouted angrily, turning to the thieves, "Is this really what they are after?" He, approaching with a hammer, stated that of course they want it. The auctioneer, standing next to Louis's skeleton, announced that Louis was the main attraction tonight, but the auctioneer, sobbing, exclaims that if this item becomes a danger to his precious customers, then it would be better to destroy him entirely, and his hands clutch the axe's shaft tightly. The man brings the weapon down with force on Louis's skeleton, causing bones to fly in all directions. The host, with a crazy smile and glowing eyes, wonders how they are enjoying his flawless performance. He thinks that if he runs away now, the guests will stop looking for him, wondering why Louis isn't showing up. However, after what he had just done, he guaranteed they would obsess over him even more while the woman covered her mouth in horror, and the man beside her was shocked. The auctioneer smirks gloatingly, saying that he has already gotten his hands on the real portrait of Louis, and this skeleton is just a fake picked up at the tavern. A dark silhouette with a single white eye utters, "Sir Louis?" The blood-red moon shines ominously in the swirling swirl of clouds in the night sky. The anchor shouts in a panic that it's an earthquake, and something wrong is happening to the heavens. A dragoness, engulfed in purple flames, hovers over the auction stage, declaring that she promised to return Sir Louis to his original appearance and berates herself for being presumptuous. Her face is in close-up, one eye burning red, the other white, a tear rolls down her cheek, and she announces that everyone present today will die. A powerful column of pink energy bursts out of the ground, rushing into the sky where an energy vortex swirls and 3 red glowing eyes can be seen below. A mage in a blue robe and hat and staff stands among the defeated and frightened people, and at the bottom is signed Imperial Guardsman of the Felton Imperial Family, commonly known as Storm Gyrex. Gyrex is terrified, covered in sweat, unable to believe what is happening, his eyes widened with fear. He remembers himself as a baby in diapers and thinks his name is Gyrex, and he thought he was the main character despite being born poor. In the flashbacks, young Gyrex demonstrates his overwhelming power by creating a blue energy barrier that throws the surprised man off. Gyrex, with a glowing sphere of mana in his hand, ponders how he, born poor, single-handedly gained incredible powers of magic. He is remembered laughing and surrounded by gold coins, graduating from an elite course at a magic school and rebuilding his family through his power, but Gyrex looks at the hovering dragoness, shrouded in a red aura, and realizes with horror that this is what overwhelming power really means. A dragoness with multicolored eyes, red and white, coldly said, "Die." Violet sharply intercepted the demoness's hand, in which purple flames raged, ready to rain down on everyone. Holding Dracosha's hand with a blazing blob of energy, the girl warned that the building would collapse at this rate, and the demoness looked at her perplexed. Dragoness asked Violet with anger in her voice if she was okay with this state of affairs. After all, they had killed Lord Louis. The violet-haired girl calmly countered that Lord Louis was not dead, much to the demoness's puzzlement. Violet suggested that Dracosha take a closer look at Lord Louis's bones scattered on the ground. She explained that the ability Lord Louis had gained by becoming a skeleton was called ultra-regeneration, and in the image his bones began to connect, bathed in a blue-violet glow. Violet added that it was a full regeneration that was on a completely different level than normal healing magic. Dracosha realized with amazement that this meant Lord Louis was alive, and Violet confirmed her hunch as the auctioneer paced back in horror. The girl with burning scarlet eyes gathered her hair into a ponytail and asked with an icy smile, asking if they should now punish the one who dared to pick the flower, while the auctioneer looked at them in fear. Violet scatters her enemies in a fury, her eyes burning scarlet and her bodies flying apart. The mage in the blue robe, plunged to the ground, shouts, "Die!" as he is struck by a powerful blue discharge. The caption, "Violet is seriously pissed off," accompanies an image of a girl flying swiftly into an attack. Louis's skull wonders hopefully if Violet will save him, and at the bottom is text about guilt over unwarranted trust. Dracosha angrily asks why Violet let Lord Louis die, and below is a caption about despair over not being able to protect the flower. Violet has decided to vent her anger while Louis regenerates, and the image shows her crushing her enemy with a magical strike. A girl with purple hair and a crazy smile clutches a dagger, her eyes glowing ominously red. A dragoness with burning scarlet eyes and horns silently observes the scene, her face expressing tension. The demoness thinks it's odd since Violet is clearly human. But why is there a more sinister aura emanating from her than from the demon as Violet swiftly attacks her opponent? Dracosha wondered if Violet had held back her powers in their last fight, recalling that fight. The demoness recognized with a drop of sweat on her temple that Violet was indeed intimidating, and in such a state, she could not guarantee victory no matter how strong she was. Looking at the three defeated opponents, she wondered if she, the former demon king, was really afraid of humans. Atrox, the black dragon, once the strongest demon king, prepared to repel the attack of the three enemies rushing at her. Surrounded by a pink energy vortex, the demoness exclaimed that she couldn't lose, throwing back her attackers. She noted that although her horn had not recovered, she had no choice and told Violet to watch carefully as she rescued Lord Louis. With blazing scarlet eyes and a sinister grin shrouded in a powerful aura, Dracosia demanded the ugly bastards return Lord Louis to her. Violet watched her with her hair gathered in a ponytail and a slight smile, thinking, "That girl?" Dracosia remembered how in their previous battle, and even now the two bandits looked at her pierced body in horror. Bleeding, but with a fierce gleam in her eyes, the demoness thought, Violet doesn't dodge any attacks other than deadly ones. Violet wondered if she was not afraid of death, for she herself had sworn to risk her life for Lord Louis. Dracosia, looking at the defeated hand, thought with annoyance, is she less determined than this girl? The auction host Dapara, a dishonorably dismissed imperial knight for corruption, hissed angrily that they were distracted in the middle of the battle. Grabbing a knife, he rushed forward, shouting that their deaths would be the payment. The man with a face twisted with rage added that they would pay for the auction he had disrupted. The dark silhouettes of Dracosia and Dapara froze as the latter swiftly attacked. The auctioneer growled disdainfully, addressing the demoness that she, a lowlife, was too presumptuous. A sudden blow landed on Dapara's head, making blood spurt, and he was still clutching the knife. Violet, holding the blade, thanked Dracosia for helping her see and declared that she could be stronger for Lord Louis's sake. Suddenly, the girl turned around in surprise as a shadowy wolf head with a glowing eye appeared behind her back. Violet turned around in surprise as she saw Dracosia release a powerful stream of pink energy. The demoness, with burning scarlet eyes and spread wings, let out a furious scream, surrounded by raging energy. The purple-haired girl flew off to the side, wondering anxiously if Dracosia couldn't control her power. Violet, clutching some sort of object in her hand, realized uneasily that at this rate this entire area would be destroyed. A bright full moon illuminated the night sky, peeking through the dark silhouettes of the cliffs. Louis the skeleton skull, clad in a dark cloak, let out a loud scream, its eye sockets opened wide. Dracosia and Violet exclaimed with joyful surprise that he was awake, and the girl asked if Lord Louis had regained consciousness. Louis the skeleton sat on the bed, looking around perplexed, while Dracosia and Violet looked on. The young skeleton man, still disoriented, said thoughtfully, wondering if it was a dream and that he felt like he was somewhere else. Dracosia and Violet reported with smiles that he seemed to be having a nightmare and offered Lord Louis a drink. Louis the skeleton, sipping from his mug, wondered why his companions had such faces. Dracosia and Violet giggled embarrassedly against the cracked wall, and the young man wondered if they had fought again. The girl with band-aids on her face and arm began to deny the fight, but Louise clarified if they were responsible for the broken wall. The demoness with burning eyes immediately admitted to Lord Louis that she was the one who damaged the wall. Sitting on the bed, Louise listened to Dracosia's explanation that she couldn't contain her power and went on a rampage, and Violet tried to calm her down, which caused the destruction. The young skeleton man turned to Violet to ask if the demoness was telling the truth, and the latter, with patches on her face and cheek, uncertainly confirmed it. Dracosia and Violet left the room, with the demoness striding resolutely ahead. Yawning, Dracosia informed her that she was sleepy, and Violet wondered with a smile why she had lied. The violet-haired girl remarked reproachfully to Dracosia that she was still a dangerous person, and did she really think that this lie would present her in a better light? The demoness, with a patch on her cheek and a fanged smile, nonchalantly replied, "So what?" Violet watches in amazement as Dracosia holds something out to her, saying, "Here, take this." The demoness offers Violet a small package, and she asks, perplexed, "Ointment?" Dracosia, turning away and walking away, declares that he can't live with debt, leaving the girl confused. Violet, with patches on her face, stares wistfully after Dracosia, wondering if she's worried about her. Morning comes and sunlight floods the street with the tavern where they are staying. Louis the skeleton, sitting by the window and sipping from a cup, examines his reflection. His bony hand places the cup on the table with his detached bone lying next to it. The young skeleton boy, looking at his hand, realizes that it wasn't a dream and that the girls lied to him. He remembers Dracosha and Violet with band-aids on their faces and realizes that they were protecting him. That's why their faces were like that. Luis the skeleton regretfully thinks that they've suffered a lot, and it's all because of him. Louis the skeleton examined his bony hands, contemplating what had happened. Next to his cup of coffee, he thought that if only he could get his looks back, he'd be willing to do anything. His mind flashed back to Dracosha promising to help bring back the beauty, and Violet talking about her job of watering the flowers, and he thought he hadn't forced them, they had offered to help on their own. With a red palm print on his skull, he decided that he shouldn't feel guilty. After all, he just needed to get his looks back, though at first he only thought of himself. Suddenly someone knocked, and Luis the skeleton flinched when he heard his name being called and asked if he was inside. Violet burst into the room, anxiously informing Lord Louis that something terrible had happened. The girl confusedly explained that Seungyeon had been suffering from a high fever all night and had finally lost control of her power. In front of the huge black dragon spewing flames, Luis the skeleton, with wide-open eye sockets, exclaimed in horror, "What?" Jumping out of the window and losing his head on the way, Luis the skeleton shouted to Violet for them to go to Shanyang immediately, while the girl called out to him in a panic. As he landed and grabbed his skull, he realized with horror that Seungyeon had turned into a dragon. Luis the skeleton, holding the skull with both hands, thought excitedly, "Isn't this incredibly cool?" She and Violet ran hurriedly through the stone streets, hurrying to the scene. The girl turned to him, letting him know they were almost there, and he nodded in agreement. The young skeleton boy enthusiastically pondered that this wasn't just any dragon, but a demon king's dragon, and it would be absolutely amazing. In his imagination, he and Violet were already flying on a mighty Dracosha in the bright sunshine, and he was sure that with that kind of help, it was only a matter of time before he got his looks back. Pushing the crying children away, Luis the skeleton. Luis loudly shouted to Dracosha that Great Lord Luis was on his way to her. The young man's skull blurred into a wide smile as he happily said Dracosha's name. Instead of a huge dragon in front of them, a small dragoness with horns and burning scarlet eyes appeared in front of them, violently smashing the ground while shouting, "Die! Die!" Louis the skeleton watched, stunned, as an enraged Dracosha in miniature demon form broke the toy sandbox. Against the backdrop of a world cracking with frustration and the fading image of flying on a dragon, Luis's skeleton skull expressed utter bewilderment. Against the purple sky and the crescent moon, the ominous Demon King's castle loomed, held up by chains amidst the soaring rubble of the cliffs. The purple-horned demon, covered in sweat, whispered in horror that this couldn't be true, and his kin looked equally shocked. The crowd of demons stared in amazement at the figure floating in the red glow, realizing that the former Demon King, Black Dragon Atrox, was in front of them. Atrox, surrounded by a swirl of scarlet energy, declared with a predatory smile and burning eyes that she had come to reclaim her throne. Two demons, one purple, the other brown, screamed in panic, urging the others to flee. Atrox, pointing her hand down and surrounded by a pink glow, angrily ordered them all to die. The cloaked skeleton Luis swung a bony hand at the little Dracosha, who was screaming with burning eyes, "Die! Just die!" The young skeleton boy hit Dracosha on the head, causing her to crouch down, while the two men to the side watched the scene in amazement. Violet ran away swiftly, leaping over two defeated demons against a backdrop of blue sky with clouds and ruined buildings. The purple-haired girl looked out from around the corner and saw Luis the skeleton squatting next to the defeated Dracosha. Violet, towering over the skeleton Louis and the defeated Dracosha, asked if the demoness was awake, to which she quietly confirmed. Little Dragoness, lying on the ground and looking at Luis, wondered anxiously if she had done something bad while she was unconscious. A young skeleton man with a faint smile on his skull assured her that she had done nothing wrong. The demoness, still prostrate on the ground, with a blush on her cheeks, thought it was in Luis's spirit to humiliate her, the former Demon King, for no apparent reason. Luis the skeleton, rubbing his skull, concluded with satisfaction that this was the best possible outcome. Violet sternly ordered the heavily breathing little Dracosha, who was trying to get up, to get up. The young skeleton man sitting on the ground asked Violet what had happened to the demoness's body, and she began to explain. In a black and white flashback, Dracosha, in her more adult form, surrounded by cracks, realized that she must have overexerted herself before she had fully recovered her strength. Luis the skeleton looked at the little Draco carefully, who pondered the fact that she couldn't reveal the truth to him lest he worry, and noted her tiny size. The demoness, scratching her head and with a tear in her eye, exclaimed that she had no idea how it happened and just woke up like that. Atrox is disappointed. The dragon's appearance does not match her expectations at all. She asks hopefully if she can return to her original form. Luis calmly replies that it's for the best. Atrox clenches her fists and says with determination that even if she isn't the dragon they imagined, she will still protect Luis. Luis takes Atrox's hands in his, looking at her carefully. She is a little confused and surprised by this action, not realizing what is happening. Luis, holding her in front of him, hesitantly asks if she can really protect him like this. Violet watches this with surprise. Luis is grateful to Atrox for her efforts to restore his body, but says she needs to take care of herself first before thinking of others. 6. Atrox is a bit taken aback, but dutifully agrees, promising to understand his words. Luis adds that the same words apply to Violet. She agrees with a smile, feeling supported. Luis gently cradles Atrox against him and notices that her fur is very soft. Atrox blushes and embarrassedly says, "Ah." Upon realizing that her cheek has been touched by Luis, Atrox falls into a state of euphoria. She inwardly rejoices at the touch and erupts happily. Steam is literally coming out of Atrox's head from the overabundance of feelings. Luis holds her calmly in his arms, and Violet looks at her with an awkward expression. Luis the skeleton, standing over the defeated little dragoness, complained that he was hot, holding some glowing objects in his hands. The tiny demoness was breathing heavily, lying on the ground and glaring with scarlet eyes. Violet looked sternly at Dracocha sitting on the ground with her head down. The little demoness looked at Violet with a sly smile and burning eyes, letting out a quiet chuckle. The violet-haired girl reacted to Dracocha's behavior with a surprised and slightly worried expression. 2 cloaked figures creaked open the door, and a bright orange light poured in. The trio of travelers, Luis, Violet, and Dracocha, stepped confidently across the deserted terrain among the trees and rocks. The hooded skeleton youth noted with delight how great and refreshing it was to the very bones as his cloak fluttered in the wind. Continuing on his way, Luis the skeleton asked his companions if they weren't planning to depart in the evening. Violet asked with a wide grin why there was such a rush, and the little dragoness muttered back with a disgruntled look, "Ah, that—" Violet explained that they couldn't stay in the village for long, while she and Dracocha looked at the wanted poster for the 2 individuals and the 100 gold reward. The girl added with a smile that she wanted to find a way to get Luis back to his appearance as soon as possible, and Dracocha cheerfully agreed. Luis the skeleton, hearing that Sungnyeon had already found what they needed, questioned in surprise if that was really the case. He excitedly exclaimed that it was great, and he felt like they were one step closer to regaining his former appearance as Violet and Dracocha walked ahead. Violet looked at the little Draco with a slight smile as she giggled, covering her mouth. The demoness thanked Violet for last night, which caused her to ask a perplexed "what?" question. The dragoness asked the girl with a sly squint, wondering if the girl thought she wouldn't find out anything. In the demoness's memories, Violet had stopped her when she was losing control and ready to fly into a rage, and she could see the raging scarlet energy below. Little Dragoness added that Violet had been wooing her all night, and asked again if she thought she wouldn't find out. Violet, looking away, calmly advised Dracocha not to worry about it. Luis the skeleton, laughing, thought he didn't want to give Luis any extra trouble, and that the day he would find the was near, while Violet and Dracocha walked behind him. Violet, with her hair gathered into a ponytail, told Dracocha that she could do whatever she wanted to her, but she must not cause Louis any problems. The little dragoness with burning scarlet eyes listened silently to Violet's warning. The young skeleton boy, pointing to the meat sign, shouted to Violet that he could smell the delicious odor and offered to grab a bite before they went on their way. Dracocha thought with annoyance that Violet was so cold to her, but incredibly warm to Luis, who was standing next to the smiling girl. The little demoness with the horns and evil grin decided that Luis was the real villain. Outside, you could see the Knight's restaurant with a smoking chimney, with wagons and grazing animals beside it. A trio of travelers, Luis the skeleton, Violet, and little Dracocha, sat at a table in a half-empty tavern with another visitor's hands and beard visible in the foreground. Little Dragoness held the rag doll in her hands, pondering that she, the Demon King, had created this trashy toy that was described as a lost favorite doll that could relieve stress. Violet asked Louis how he was feeling with a smile, and at the bottom came a description of a strong hair rubber band capable of stretching to any length. Louis the skeleton, holding a necklace in his hand, pondered that it wasn't cool, and at the bottom you could see a description of the one-shot necklace and the cloak of shame. The young skeleton boy irritably stated that he wouldn't wear it, discarding the necklace, and Violet exclaimed that he couldn't do that. The purple-haired girl holding the amulet warned that the journey they were about to embark on might be more difficult than they thought. She listed possible dangers: weather, monsters, demons, and even other people. Violet tried to put the necklace on Louis the skeleton, assuring him that it could really help him, but he only sighed irritably. The young skeleton boy asked the little dragoness where she even got all these things from. In flashbacks, Dracosia, being in her adult form, ran past something shiny that caught her eye. The little demoness sitting on a chair admitted to stealing it, and Louis the skeleton asked doubtfully if it was normal. The dragoness declared with burning eyes and a confident look that she didn't mind stealing from bad demons, to which Louis noted her boldness. The young skeleton man, with an approving smile on his skull, said it was a good setup for finding his body, and Dracosia thanked him happily. Violet thought with surprise, "Wow, what a character!" Louis the skeleton, patting himself on the stomach, announced that he was full, and empty plates were visible on the table. Violet suggested with a smile that they should go now that they were done eating, and Louis the skeleton and the little dragoness headed for the exit. Suddenly a waitress called out to them, raising her hand and addressing them. "Excuse me, sir?" Louis the skeleton asked what was the matter, and the waitress standing in front of them informed them that they hadn't paid the bill yet. The young skeleton man perplexedly interjected, "Money!" and then added, "What money?" Skeleton claimed he'd done them a favor by eating here and wondered why he had to pay while Violet covered her mouth with her hand. Violet thought he was acting so naturally, she had almost forgotten it herself, since Louis had never paid for a meal in the past. The hostess of the establishment appeared, asking with a smile what was going on, and the waitress mumbled embarrassedly, "Boss?" The waitress informed the hostess with a nervous smile that the customer hadn't paid, to which the hostess surprisingly interjected, "Didn't pay?" The hostess of the establishment was indignant that they had not paid the bill after such a hearty dinner. The woman glared angrily at the trio, realizing they didn't have the money in the first place, while Louis tried to distract Violet by pointing at the tall man. The hostess turned to Louis the skeleton standing in the middle, and the skeleton asked in surprise if she was addressing him. Suddenly, a muscular man with a mace appeared, clutching his weapon and wondering where the skeleton got the nerve to be so brazen if he didn't have any money. The owner of the Knight's restaurant, Night Sung, impressively said that in such a case they would have to pay with their bodies. Louis the skeleton queried with interest whether to pay with his body, and added enthusiastically that he was very good at it. The young man's skull blurred into a gloating smile, and he enthusiastically proclaimed that this was his specialty. The two tavern patrons looked at each other in shock, one of them muttering whether this skeleton had gone mad, offering to pay off the body to the holy knight. Night Sung, approaching them, noted with a chuckle that since body payback was his specialty, he couldn't deny his courage. Placing his hand on Louis the skeleton's shoulder, the tavern owner with a sly look offered to make a prediction. Night Sung, clenching his fist and with a bloody nose, angrily declared that they would not leave here today. Suddenly, he perplexedly exclaimed, "Huh?" and flew into the air from the powerful impact, scattering debris. Violet stood with a smoking fist, while Louis the skeleton and little Draco looked on, while the feet of the defeated knight could be seen below. The ponytailed waitress, clapping her hands, worriedly asked the boss if he was okay, begging him to wake up. Night Sung, who was being lightly patted on the face, struggled to come to his senses, mumbling that what had just happened was only for a moment. His memory flashed back to him as he grabbed Louis the skeleton by the shoulder with a sinister smile and glowing eyes. Then he remembered how the girl with purple hair swiftly struck him. Sitting on the floor next to the waitress, Night Sung said in surprise, "Wait a minute, purple hair?" Violet, standing next to Louis the skeleton and little Draco, asked in surprise how he knew her name. Night Sung, covered in sweat and with eyes widened with terror, muttered, "Ah, now I remember." Night Sung recalled someone rudely addressing him with the words, "Hey, you freak." In his mind, the big man in armor had put his hand on Violet's head, stating that if you pushed someone, you should apologize. The thug grabbed the girl by the hair, noting her hostile look and asking threateningly if she wanted to be beaten to a plea for mercy. Night Sung plunged to the ground with a broken face, tearfully begged for mercy. Violet, shaking off her hands, couldn't believe she had lost to a woman, but even more unbelievable was another thing. Louis appeared and asked Violet if she had done it, and the latter, laughing embarrassedly and surrounded by hearts, apologized to Lord Louis. Night Sung pondered who this person was who was able to subdue that strong woman with just one word. He wondered if Louis, standing next to Violet, was the stronger man. The day Night Sung dreamed of becoming the strongest, he was defeated for the first time, while Louise asked Violet if she was all right, and she answered in the affirmative. However, the strong are always drawn to the strong, and Night Sung, naked to the waist, confessed that he had fallen in love with Lord Louis, who was standing next to Violet. Night Sung, naked to the waist and laughing, remembers getting ready to confess his feelings, holding a bouquet of yellow flowers. In his memoirs, he greets Lord Louis with reverence, saying he is delighted to meet him. Night Sung in the past bows down and holds out a bouquet to Louis, introducing himself as a holy knight, to which Louis idly asks, "And?" Night Sung begins his confession with a smile, saying that from the first time he met Lord Louis, he has been strongly... Violet stares at the knight in reminiscence with shock and burning eyes, perplexed as to whether this is really a confession. Suddenly, Night Sung is hit, his face contorted in pain, and he cries out. That afternoon, his attempt to express his feelings to Lord Louis ends in failure, and he, discouraged, drops the bouquet. And so, as time passes, Night Sung in his apron recalls the past with a grim look. He couldn't believe he was seeing Violet again, who, as he put it, was glued to Lord Louis. Night Sung realizes with horror that this means that the cloaked man next to Violet is... Night Sung was startled to recognize the cloaked figure, exclaiming, "Lord Louis!" He assumed that Louis wore a cape to avoid crowds because of his incredible beauty, and decided it was quite the thing to do. Seeing the strongest man again, the knight felt his heart pounding frantically. He was worried about his weakened state, not wanting to show himself to Lord Louis like this, and doubted he even remembered him. Sitting on the floor next to the waitress, Night Sung decided to pretend as if nothing had happened. He asked Louis, the skeleton, Violet, and little Draco just to leave. Turning away, the tavern owner added that he needed to prepare for the lunchtime influx of customers. Violet turned to him with a smile. "Holy Knight, I'm glad you're all right," which shocked him. The girl continued that when he suddenly disappeared, she had wondered where he had gone and now realized that he lived here. Violet announced with a sly smile that she had read his letter left in the bouquet, noting his beautiful handwriting and culinary talents. Louis the skeleton, leaving the tavern, said with a smile that he could pay for the meal as soon as he settled an urgent matter. The waitress turned indignantly to the boss, perplexed as to whether he was really letting them leave for nothing, since they hadn't even paid and were acting like complete lunatics. The girl with ponytails shaking Night Sung persistently, asked if he was listening to her at all. The tavern owner, with a tremor in his voice and a tear running down his cheek, whispered that he remembered him. Night Sung, naked to the waist with tears of delight and shining eyes, enthusiastically exclaimed that the strongest man remembered him. An elderly, bearded tavern visitor remarked to his companion that he never thought he would live to see the day when he saw a holy knight weeping, and even using the word strongest in reference to another man. Night Sung, holding the laughing waitress who asked him to calm down because people were watching, pondered who the cloaked man was and assumed that since he had brought a beautiful woman with him, he knew her price. The hooded, cloaked figure was moving away against the sunset sky, leaving the confines of the tavern. The city of Frigiris spread out before them with a majestic castle in the center, flooded with sunlight under a blue sky with clouds. On the roof of a building with a smoking chimney and a dragon emblem, a sign reading Adventurer Examination Venue could be seen. Inside the Adventurers Guild, there was the usual bustle of people standing at the counter, others sitting at tables, and all sorts of creatures walking around the hall. Suddenly, a stout mustachioed man with a bundle on his head bellowed irritably at someone, "Hey you! Get out of the way! Don't block the passage!" and then asked perplexedly, "What?" Turning back to the entrance, the same big guy muttered in surprise, "What the hell?" Little Dragoness stood in front of him with a menacing look, and he, seeing Louis in his cloak, immediately changed his face and announced loudly, "Hey, didn't you hear? Make way, Lord Louis is coming through." The demoness glared fiercely at the man who addressed Louis in a subservient manner. "Lord Louis, what brings you here?" To which the young man standing next to Violet replied that he had come to take the adventurer's exam. Louis the skeleton, holding a scroll in his bony hand, explained his decision. "I need to make money." Violet and Dracocha immediately volunteered to help, and the violet-haired girl assured, "Lord Louis, Sonyan and I will make money for you." And the demoness concurred, "That's right. Violet and I will make money." The young skeleton boy asked doubtfully, "And how exactly are you going to earn them?" Causing Violet to look embarrassed, while Dracocha, who was sitting on the floor, stated confidently, "I have a way." The demoness with burning eyes proposed her plan. "I'll beat up some humans and take away their money." And Violet, clenching her fist, added that since Song Yun was a bad demon, it was fine. Louis the skeleton, looking at his companions, asked with obvious disapproval, "You two have no guilt at all?" Louis the skeleton, gesturing with his bony gloved hands, thought, "Well, anyway." Violet and little Draco listened as he continued that he was pleased with their concern and would just take their thoughts to heart. The hooded skeleton youth stated with a determined glint in his eyes that they were so broke that they couldn't even afford to eat. So how could he just sit back? Violet and Dracocha looked at him with surprise and some concern as the petals hovered around them. As he approached the front desk where the clerk sat, Louis the skeleton informed him that he was taking the adventurer's exam and was directed to go to the right. Little Dragoness said with burning eyes that she thought for a moment she saw Lord Louis's face, and Violet, turning away, added that she thought so too, but it must be imagination. Violet and Dracocha, jumping up and down with excitement, announced that they were also signing up for the exam along with Lord Louis, who interjected in surprise. A little bird with a sun umbrella flew across a blue sky with white clouds. The first physical test of the adventurer's exam began, where the exhausted contestants collapsed without strength while the examiner took notes. The female examiner was cheering up the contestant with a smile, saying that he was doing a great job and was almost at the target while he fought with a lightsaber. A little Dracoshka with a mouthpiece was cheering furiously for Lord Louis, urging him to crush everyone, while Violet noted doubtfully that it was just a physical test, and a sign about qualifications for humans could be seen at the bottom. Louis the skeleton in the cloak, staggering with fatigue, struggled to overcome the ordeal. Exhausted, the young skeleton boy pleaded, "Please kill me." The examiner, in front of a crowd of participants including Violet, Louis, and Dracocha, announced the announcement of the results of the adventurer's exam. First place, as reported by the announcer, went to Violet, who stood confidently while Dracocha looked on with a smile. It was then announced that the last spot went to Louis, which elicited chuckles from the other two contestants. Suddenly, the examiner proclaimed extra pass, which shocked the mockers. Louis the skeleton, holding the joyfully screaming Violet and Dracocha on his shoulders, proudly stated that he was just holding back. The sign an hour earlier appeared against the serene sky, and someone said, "Nice to meet you." The female examiner, standing in the opening of the cave, introduced herself as the person in charge of the final test, addressing the waiting participants. The examiner introduced herself as Elnan the ninja elf. The exam participants panicked because Elnan had the lowest pass rate, and Louis the skeleton was sleeping at the time. The elven examiner released blue energy with a flash of her eyes. The powerful impact scattered several of the contestants, while Louis the skeleton continued to doze and Violet watched. Elnan, with glowing red eyes and sharp claws, sternly ordered the chatter to stop, to which the participants fearfully agreed. Violet and Louis the skeleton saw Elnan and another member doing something by the rock, and the girl wondered if they were drilling the ground with a needle. Examiner Elnan announced that this test was easy. With a crazy smile and burning eyes, she explained that one only needed to withstand her attacks before time ran out. Louis the skeleton, getting encouragement from Violet and Little Dragoness, who shouted, "Go, Louis, good luck!" got ready for the challenge. The skeleton-cloaked youth stood in front of Examiner Elnan, who had adopted a fighting stance against the blue sky. In the sandy arena in front of the cave entrance, Louis the skeleton and Elnan the examiner were preparing to begin the test, while a group of observers could be seen off to the side. The skeletal youth swallowed nervously, his skull covered in sweat in the face of the stern Elphus. Elnan announced with a determined look, "Let the trial begin." Suddenly, she asked Luis the skeleton what it was on his clothes, to which the skeleton surprisingly interjected, "Huh?" The elfess pointed to the side, diverting Luis's attention, who looked perplexed at where she was pointing. Elnan, smirking gloatingly, thought he had completely fallen for her ploy and promptly attacked him from above. Luis the skeleton, realizing the deception, thought with horror, "Ah, that teacher." Elnan's powerful blow raised a column of dust and debris into the air, throwing her herself aside. One of the examiners shouted indignantly, "Did it befit an elf to be so conniving?" and demanded that the examiner fight fair. Elnan, upon landing, stated that an adventurer must always be on his guard, and if he fell for such a ruse he would be disqualified, then stepped forward in preparation for his next action. The elven examiner looked at him in bewilderment, uttering, "Huh?" Elnan asked Luis the skeleton if he had dodged her attack, to which he pointed to himself in surprise. The elf girl in profile was perplexed as to how he had managed to dodge, admitting she hadn't even noticed it. The young skeleton man, beside whom his ghostly reflection appeared, was also wondering how he managed to dodge, since he couldn't see anything. Luis the skeleton asked Elnan if she was sure she had attacked correctly, making her slightly confused. The examiner indignantly asked if he meant to say that her attacks didn't even feel like attacks, calling him overconfident. Elnan resolutely declared that she would fight at full strength this time and unleashed a flurry of punches at him. Wide-eyed and mouth wide open, Violet screamed Luis's name in horror, while in the background the other contestants tried to fight back or run away. The elfess crossed her arms over her chest and asked confidently if he could see the difference between them now. Luis the skeleton, with a perplexed look on his skull, interjected, "Difference? What difference?" causing Elnan to let out a suppressed sound. The elfess was perplexed as he dodged her attacks without flinching, for she was only aiming for vital points. Elnan realized with horror that her attacks were not working, and the reason was surprisingly simple. The examiner was aiming for blood vessels, but Luis was composed of nothing but bone, rendering her tactics useless. Elnan's attack aimed at pain points was completely ineffective against Luis, who simply had none. In the eyes of the elf who didn't know that fact, Louis looked like an opponent she couldn't defeat. The huge monster she thought she couldn't defeat stood before her, and she was overcome with trepidation. Elnan's hand trembled as she looked at the unwavering Louis the skeleton. Overwhelmed by fear and despair, the elfess whispered that she must. With a mad gleam in her eyes and blood on her face, she thought determinedly that she must kill him. Elnan's ominous red eye met Violet's determined violet gaze, heralding a new turn of events. Violet, with a cry of, "Look out, Louis!" rushed in front of Elnan, who attacked the skeleton youth with a burning eye, who perplexedly said, "Hmm?" A powerful blue energy blast knocked Elnan back, causing an explosion and scattering debris. The other examiners scattered in horror, wondering what the ordeal was and whether the examiner was trying to kill Luis. Elnan's face contorted into a crazed smile, her eyes burning red and cracks showing through her face. Violet, holding the little dragoness, angrily asked Elnan what she was doing to Luis and demanded that it stop immediately. Little Dragoness, peering out from behind Violet's hand, noted that the examiner was acting very strangely. Elnan, with a mad glint in her eyes and covered in battle markings, let out a low growl. Suddenly the elfess said, "Huh?" in surprise, as if waking up from an obsession, and her eyes returned to their normal color. The examiner was replaced after Luis's test, and the rest of the contestants continued to take their exams, while Violet and Dracosia cheered the young man on. Luis the skeleton, who came in last place but still passed the exam, proudly stated that he was just holding back. Violet and little Draco congratulated Luis, who modestly waved it off, saying it was nothing. The young skeleton man announced that he would bring them a task and asked them to wait here, to which the companions nodded in agreement. Luis the skeleton, humming "La la 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 la," departed, and Violet and Dracosia were left standing in the cobblestone square. The girl with purple hair was looking somewhere in the distance with a slight smile. Suddenly, a stranger in a dark cloak approached her and greeted her, and Violet looked at him questioningly. Felton, a master of the Paratus Guild, one of the 4 great guilds of the Empire, accompanied by 2 armored knights, had arrived. Felton, with a friendly smile, invited Violet to join his illustrious guild. Suddenly, another man approached them, who grinningly remarked to Felton that he seemed to be a little late while Violet watched them. The newcomer, surrounded by a glower and 2 warriors in red cloaks, introduced himself as Solidus, the master of the Guild of Solidus, also one of the 4 great guilds of the Empire. Solid also expressed his desire to invite Violet to his guild, which made the girl look at both masters in surprise, not believing her ears. Felton stated to Solid that he had arrived first, but the latter countered that he had arrived yesterday, and Violet added that she had been here a month ago. 2 passers-by were discussing in amazement that an aspiring adventurer was receiving offers from 2 of the 4 great guilds of the Empire. The guild masters, pushing aside their knights, begged Violet to join them, inquiring about her desires. The girl with purple hair asked if they could return the body to normal, which puzzled both men. Violet clarified that she was talking about a person who was neither alive nor dead, and whether that was possible, while the little Dracotia listened intently. Felton and Solid, upon reflection, admitted that they had never heard of such a thing. Violet then announced with a serious look that she had to decline their offer. She explained that if the body could not be restored, then it was pointless for her, and she would follow whoever she chose to serve, and Dracotia smiled slyly. Louis the Skeleton suddenly appeared with a scroll in his hand, announcing to Violet that he had received a new request, while Dracotia and the strange creature responded cheerfully. The young skeleton man announced that he would go his way then, leaving Violet with the 2 puzzled guildmasters. Violet and Little Dragoness ran swiftly after Louis, who was already out of sight. Felton said thoughtfully that refusing for the sake of restoring someone who was neither alive nor dead was a very unusual way to turn down an offer. Solid wondered who this Louis was, since a member of one of the 4 great guilds had neglected their invitations for his sake. The 2 guildmasters, along with their companions, including a mighty warrior in armor, concluded that Louis must have strength beyond normal might. Meanwhile, 2 more representatives of the great guilds appeared: Fulker, master of the Fulham Guild, and Mysticus, master of the Mysticus Guild. Mystique confidently told Fulker that such a power would never manifest again, to which he countered that they had no way of knowing. Louis the Skeleton, along with Violet and little Draco, continued on their way through the deserted area, while someone off-screen wondered if the young man had returned from the other side of the world. Their target turned out to be a dungeon, the entrance to which was decorated with bones and a sign reading "Goblin's Lair." Inside, 3 goblins, covered in sweat and clutching clubs, stared angrily at the uninvited guests. Louis the Skeleton, smiling broadly, inquired curiously as to what it was in front of them. Louis the Skeleton and Violet found themselves surrounded by goblins, one of whom asked with a snarl if it was only a goblin. A larger goblin suddenly appeared and indignantly ordered the rest of the idiots to get out of the way, for they couldn't even handle 3 people. This goblin leader, walking up to Louis and Violet, who were fighting off the smaller kin, called out loudly, "Hey!" to them. Before them stood the Goblin King Go, who with a club in his hand menacingly inquired as to who they were that they were loitering in his territory. The Goblin King took a closer look at Louis and said with surprise, "You—" Louis the Skeleton, gazing into the face of the Goblin King, also thought perplexedly, "You—" The image of the first goblin he had met when he first awakened as a skeleton surfaced in his mind. Then he remembered how that same goblin had mercilessly beaten him along with the others. Violet, noticing Louis's strange behavior, who froze and was surrounded by an ominous aura, worriedly called his name. Goblin King Guo, smirking gloatingly, recalled how Louis the Skeleton Louis had trembled like a cowardly puppy. Goblin King Guo asked the skeleton with a sneer if this reminded him of the old days, and offered to get a punch. He swiftly attacked Louis the Skeleton Louis with his club, but the latter managed to block the blow by letting out an exclamation. The Goblin King, surrounded by blood splatters, exclaimed in astonishment, "What is this?" Louis the Skeleton, with glowing violet eyes and a club in his hand, gloatingly declared that he was glad to meet this goblin bastard. The rest of the goblins, shivering with fear and covered in sweat, swallowed nervously as they watched. The little dragoness, with a sly grin, and Violet holding the dagger, quietly watched the scene unfold. Louis the Skeleton was mercilessly beating the Goblin King, who was screaming for him to stop beating him. The young man's skull, surrounded by a purple glow, let out a loud rolling laughter. The defeated Goblin King lay on the ground, breathing heavily, and Louis the Skeleton, also panting, stood over him. The Goblin King, barely able to raise himself up and breathing heavily, wondered with bewilderment if this skeleton bastard was really the one he knew. Louis the Skeleton, rubbing his fist, noted with satisfaction that it was refreshing, and the Goblin King was perplexed as to why he had changed so much. The trembling Goblin King turned to the skeleton, asking incredulously if he wasn't afraid of him. Luis the skeleton remembered being beaten mercilessly by goblins, while their leader claimed fear should be engraved in his bones. The Goblin King received a sudden blow to the head, and Luis the skeleton called out to him, "Hey!" The young skeleton man wondered with a contemptuous grin why on earth he would be afraid of such a small-minded brat. The skeleton, pointing his thumb behind his back, motioned for the Goblin King to turn around. Violet and little Draco stood behind him, and he asked defiantly if the goblin thought he would be scared. Luis the skeleton stated with a stern look that he was no longer the defenseless skeleton he used to beat up. The Goblin King shouted in rage that Luis only thought he was strong because of the support, and that without them he would have already... The goblin leader recoiled in horror as he saw the ominous magnified images of Violet and Dracosia looming over him, and cried out, "What?" Goblin King Guo, covered in sweat, thought that although he was angry, but for the sake of survival he had no choice. The leader of the goblins, showing a thumbs up, admitted defeat, saying that the skeleton had won. Louis Skeleton called out to him, "Hey!" And Goblin King Guo bewilderedly replied, "Yeah?" The young skeleton man squatted down and tapped his club on the ground, warning him not to think he got off easy by trying to look friendly. The Goblin King, sitting on the ground, gulped and muttered that this wasn't the end and told them to get ready. Luis the skeleton, looming over the Goblin King with a battered club, ordered him not to dodge or he would break his bones as he begged for mercy. 3 wooden mugs of foamy liquor, one of them bone-colored, clinked together to the cry of "Cheers!" At a table in the tavern, Luis the skeleton, Violet, and little Dracosia were drinking from mugs, and the girl praised Luis for a good job, to which he replied that it was great. The young skeleton man, picking up a wooden box, offered Violet and Dracosia to order whatever they wanted to eat while they drank from their mugs. Violet, with her mouth full, worriedly asked Luis if he was sure, and the man, eating his noodles, assured her not to worry and to order whatever she wanted. Violet expressed concern that the released goblin might try to retaliate, and Louis the skeleton wondered if he should be finished off now. The skull of a young skeleton boy dipped in a mug of drink looked pensive. The girl reminded Louis that this goblin had once harmed him and offered to kill him now, while Dracosia smirked gloatingly, and the skeleton asked if she really thought so. In his mind, the Goblin King Go was begging for mercy, drenching himself in sweat, promising to be a loyal dog if Luis let him live. Luis's close-up skull pondered the goblin, loyal as a dog, and remained silent. The young skeleton man with a faint smile on his skull spoke Violet's name, as if making a decision. The skeleton, shaking his money pouch, declared that he had gotten his revenge and that was enough, plus he was paid for sparing the goblin. Violet, with her hair gathered in a ponytail, looked at Louis seriously, listening to his arguments. The girl with a slight smile and a blush on her cheeks agreed with Louis, confirming his words. The fork stabbed into the appetizing sausage on the plate, drizzled with sauce with carrots next to it. The little dragoness with burning eyes tried to feed Luis the skeleton from her fork, saying, "Open your mouth, Luis, to which he noticed he was right there. The demoness grudgingly asked Violet what she was doing when the girl took the initiative with a piece of meat on her knife, calling Dracosia's behavior rude. Violet, with a stern look and her hair gathered in a ponytail, warned Dracosia not to do anything that would upset Louis, her knife glinting slightly. The little demoness pouted her lips, complaining that Violet was preventing her from doing anything here, but then added, "However..." Dracosia's hand twirled the fork with force, surrounded by a purple glow, preparing for some sort of action. With glowing red eyes, the demoness pointed a glowing fork at Violet, stating that her actions were beginning to annoy her, and asked if she was seeking death. Violet's hand clutched the glowing knife, and she calmly but firmly advised Dracosia to sit down, saying it politely one last time. The violet-haired girl and the little demoness crossed their improvised weapons in front of Luis's silhouette, and Violet once again demanded not to disturb him. Louis the skeleton, covered in sweat and blushing embarrassedly, asked bewilderedly if they were really going to argue right in front of him, while the fork and knife were pointed at each other at his head. Violet, laughing nervously and holding the bottle, hastened to assure him that they weren't fighting and offered to pour Louis a drink. With bottle in hand and a sly smile, Draco offered Luis to pour him a drink. Louis the skeleton sat silently between Violet and Draco, who were both holding bottles and smiling. The young skeleton boy, pouring himself from the bottle, asked them to stop, and Violet and Dracosia looked at each other angrily. Suddenly, there was a scuffle in the tavern, and Luis the skeleton was in the center of the fight, knocking over a table. Two men at a neighboring table debated whether they should intervene, but one of them decided it was a common thing to do while drinking. The scarred man, listening, suggested that they seemed to be fighting over a guy. Violet, fighting someone off, yelled that this one was pure and beautiful. Little Dragoness, also involved in a food and cutlery fight, added that this one is pretty cute. Louis the skeleton, surrounded by flying bottles and mugs, drank quietly while the man behind the scenes wondered how he could behave like that. The scarred man, clutching his spoon, pondered if this was the confidence of someone who had everything. Lone Sky Guild Master Mosul, along with his two companions, looked at someone with disdain, finding it rather annoying. It was deep night, and only the dim light from the windows illuminated the city streets. In the tavern, empty plates, chopsticks, and a wooden mug with an unfinished drink were left on the table. Louis the skeleton, blushing, poured himself another drink, wondering if he should order a refill since his drink seemed to have run out. Suddenly, Mosul and his men approached his table, and the guild leader called out to him briefly, "Hey!" Mosul rudely told Louis the skeleton that he didn't belong in this bar and should get out. The skeleton youth, blushing embarrassedly, interjected in bewilderment, "Ah! What do you mean by saying that I am nothing?" One of Mosul's henchmen turned to his boss to clarify if he thought he was useless, and added that even though it was true, he shouldn't have spoken so harshly. Then that same Mosul companion, with a cry of "baldness is a condition that cannot be remedied by mere endeavor," suddenly punched Louis the skeleton. From the strong blow, Louis the skeleton collapsed to the tavern floor, unable to stay on his feet. Louis the skeleton let out a short exclamation of "Ah!" while lying on the floor with his mouth ajar. The skeleton youth, looking furtively, thought that this type was really something. Sitting on the floor of the tavern, he continued to ponder that this guy was really something with something. Louis the skeleton then turned to Mosul, asking if, as an ugly bald type, he should be looking after his children normally. Mosul and his companion were shocked by the words ugly and bald, their faces contorted with anger. The guild leader gritted his teeth and resented how hair could be mentioned at all in the era of hair loss, calling Louis an impudent man. Mosul, pointing at Louis the skeleton, ordered his men to beat him to a pulp. Covering his face with his hand, the skeleton youth asked with a sneer, wondering if they thought they could beat him to a pulp. Pointing his finger, he asked his attackers if they had heard what he had just been told. Louis the skeleton's skull expressed extreme bewilderment, a question mark appearing above it. Violet, looking at the sleeping Dracosia, explained that Louis's surroundings were sparkling, and added, addressing someone, that it was because of his bald head. Louis the skeleton, surrounded by a purple aura, looked questioningly at the two thugs rushing at him. Violet and Little Dragoness were sleeping soundly in the same bed, turned away from each other. Violet, who had woken up, looked over at Dracosia, who was holding her head, complaining that it was about to split open. Louis the skeleton, standing by the bed where Violet and Dracosia were sitting, asked if they were awake. Little Dragoness asked Louis with a sly smile what happened yesterday, to which he replied that they were both drunk, so he carried them back. Violet and Draco apologized to Louis, who assured her that everything was fine. The young skeleton man adjusted his dark cloak with a clasp. Louis the skeleton with spots on his skull suggested not to bother and just eat. Violet and Dracosia looked at something with surprise and question marks above their heads. Violet and Draco exclaimed in horror as to why Louis's face looked like that, what had happened to him, and who had done it. Louis, embarrassingly covering his skull, thought how embarrassing this was, and that the great Louis couldn't be beaten like this. The young skeleton boy, laughing nervously, assured them that he had simply tripped in the street while Violet and Dracosia looked at him with concern. Violet, coming up the stairs, told Louise to wash up and come down to eat. The girl squinted her head, thinking it wasn't just a bruise from the fall and she could almost remember. A fiery wolf-like aura of fire erupted behind Violet's back as she continued to ponder. Draco suggested that Louis was hiding the truth because he thought they would be worried and was trying to hide the fact that he'd been hit. In flashbacks, Violet explains to a sleeping Draco that Louis's entourage is sparkling because of that bald guy calling her an idiot. Another memory showed Louis ordering his men to beat those two men to a pulp. Little Dragoness, surrounded by pink smoke, thought it was the same guys from yesterday and said Violet's name. The Dragoness, eyes glittering scarlet, declared her intention to crush those who had done this to Luis while Violet stood behind her. Violet, with a determined gleam in her eyes, said she would have stated so, for she had told them not to do anything that would hurt Louis. The demoness with burning eyes angrily asked Violet how she could say such a thing after what she saw with Luis. The girl with purple hair, holding 2 glowing daggers and heading towards Dracosia, indicated that she would go with her, to which the girl asked in surprise, "What?" she interjected. Violet, gathering her hair into a ponytail, firmly pronounced that anyone who harmed Louis. The dragoness with burning yellow eyes asked if they should make sure those never did that again. The demoness and the girl, both with glittering eyes and grinning teeth, agreed with each other, and Dracosia exclaimed, "You're right, Violet." In front of them was the Lone Sky Guild's hideout, a secluded cabin in the forest. Mosul, with his face twisted in pain, let out an anguished groan. Bound and gagged, Mosul continued to moo in pain, his face expressing misery. One of the men informs his older brother that someone has come to see them. The leader is not interested and tells him to send the guest away. After a pause, he adds that the girl was pretty. His interest is immediately piqued. After these words, he changes his mind and orders her to be let in. Violet and the hooded Atrox appear at the door. The bald man, playing with a knife, recognizes Violet. He remembers seeing her yesterday with some weakling. He approaches her and asks her how she found them. He also notices that she came with a rather nice friend. Stepping closer and holding the knife to Violet's neck, he asks with a snide smile if the two of them have come for revenge. As he continues to threaten, he wonders why she even wanted that wimpy guy and hints that she and her friends are much better off. His accomplices support this thought with smug smirks. In the background, a bound captive is seen whispering, "Save me." Violet abruptly grabs his hand and calmly asks him if that's the hand he used to hit Luis. The man is shocked by her actions. He starts to blush and confusedly admits that yes, he did hit her with that hand. In his mind, he's already fantasizing that holding hands will mean they'll be married soon. Violet says coldly, "I see." Violet cut off the arm of one of Mosul's henchmen in one precise motion, while Dracosia and the other thug watched. The downed thug screamed in unbearable pain, and his comrades recoiled in horror. The dragoness said with a gloating grin that if they tried to pick the flower, they would have their hand cut off, and if they stepped on it, their foot, calling them ignorant fools. Violet wondered with a determined expression how they even planned to harm the flower. Mosul wailed in rage to his men what they were doing and ordered them to immediately attack and kill them while they nervously glanced around. 2 of Mosul's henchmen, armed with daggers, rushed at Violet and Dracosia, who was just taking her demonic form. Luis the skeleton sat alone in the deserted tavern at a table, sighing heavily. He rubbed his skull gently, complaining that it was quite painful, and wondered if he had asked not to be punched in the face. Suddenly, Dragoness ran into the tavern room, joyfully exclaiming, "Louis, I'm back!" And the skeleton looked in her direction in surprise. The demoness with a sly smile informed Luis, who inquired where she had gone, that she had brought something that could help make money. Dracosia stated that this man with green hair should say hello to Luis, mentioning his ability to make money, to which the man surprisingly interjected that he was talking about him and money. Luis the skeleton, scratching his skull, asked who the chubby uncle was, calling him a lousy guy. The man with green hair, covered in sweat, indignantly asked if the disrespectful brat knew who he was. The dragoness, with burning scarlet eyes and sharp fangs, declared that he was the disrespectful bastard and ordered him to speak to Luis respectfully if he didn't want to die. The man with green hair, visibly nervous and swallowing, made a squeezed sound. Luis the skeleton asked Dracosia not to scare him and just eat, while Violet and the demoness sat at the table. The young skeleton man gestured invitingly and suggested the man join them if he was hungry. The green-haired man pondered the suggestion in silence. Deciding it might just be worth a shot, he headed over to their table. The entire company, including Luis, Violet, little Dracosia, and a man with green hair, were sitting around a table in the tavern. The man with green hair, holding a bun in his hand, was puzzled as to what was going on here. He remembered how his captors, Violet and Dracosia, had fought and noted that they were far from weaklings, and dealing with them without casualties was no easy task. These two, with completely different personalities, didn't seem to be the kind of people who would obey anyone. The man looked in amazement at Luis, Violet, and Dracosia at the table, wondering how he had managed to make them so obedient. He realized it was impossible to control them with money or force, so it was something else. The green-haired man looked up, wondering if that was the only possible option. Louis the skeleton, taking a bite out of his bun, looked questioningly at his new acquaintance. The man bowed low to Louis and introduced himself. "My name is Diluc." Diluc explained that he had been the lord of the village of Lebellum until recently, to which Louis mentally interjected, "Until recently?" Diluc's eye reflected Louis, and he thought confidently that he had already figured it out, having guessed what lurked beneath that cloak. Louis the skeleton, covering his skull with his hand, thought with delight, "Isn't that an incredible beauty?" and wondered how Diluc knew that. Diluc, sitting at the table with Violet and Dracosia, explained that he had become a lord thanks to a little flair, and the demoness thought her prediction had come true. The man with green hair asked if it was Louis and stated that he liked the man. In Diluc's memories, a beautiful girl in a white dress among flowers appeared, and he said that if he told about his daughter, she would be an incomparable beauty, and suitors would line up. Diluc has asked bluntly in the past if Louis wanted to marry his daughter. The young skeleton man, humming thoughtfully, replied, "Sure." Violet and Dragoness, drinking from a mug, watched the scene with amazement. Diluc, pointing his finger, informed him that there was a condition to authorize the marriage, and Louis the skeleton interjected in surprise, "Condition?" The skeleton looked at Diluc and wondered if he thought he could marry the princess unconditionally, and then fell silent. Louis the skeleton looked away and stated that he wasn't getting married then, musing that he was hoping for a favorable deal, and Diluc jumped up from his chair, exclaiming. Diluc exclaimed indignantly why the man refused, for his daughter was incredibly beautiful. The young skeleton man replied that he was busy and had no time to discuss terms, adding that any daughter is beautiful in her father's eyes. Diluc wondered with despair if Louis was only refusing marriage because he was busy, and decided to take the direct approach. The man with green hair suggested that Louis was looking for something, didn't he? Louis the skeleton wondered how the man knew, and Diluc reminded him that he had become a lord because of his powers of observation. Diluc, not knowing exactly what Louis was looking for, offered his help in the search. The young skeleton man noticed that the man had no idea what he was looking for, but didn't seem to mind helping. Diluc assumed that if Louis was just wandering around looking for something lost, it was a waste of time while Violet and Dracosia sat at the table. A man with green hair asked to save the village of Lebellum, promising a treasure in return. Louis the skeleton interjected with interest, "Treasure?" The horse-drawn wagon moved slowly along the stony road among the hills and sparse trees. Inside the shaky wagon, Louis the skeleton and Violet sat across from Diluc, who was yawning, and little Dracosia was asleep. Diluc, looking at the sleeping dragoness with horns, wondered exactly how they planned to save Lebellum and what that cute species was. Louis the skeleton crossed his bony arms and suggested to Diluc, since he was so worried, to hit him and see what would happen, to which he frightenedly thought, "Oh no." Violet, holding the dagger, stated that it was Louis's decision, and she would follow him, but if Diluc tricked them, he'd better be ready, and asked how he would help them find what they wanted. Diluc, clenching his fist, pondered that he had once been a lord and was now losing face, but now was not the time to worry about that. Violet put the dagger to the throat of Diluc, who asked her to lower her weapon, and offered to explain about the treasure. An ancient scroll was unrolled in front of them, showing a map with a place marked with a cross. A bearded king in a crown, Diluc's ancestor, tired of wars, dreamed of a peaceful life. It was thanks to this map that their ancestors discovered the village of Lebellum, visible at the foot of the snow-capped mountains. The village would not have been inundated even in the event of a flood thanks to ice barriers. With good sunshine and wind, crops were plentiful and people worked in the fields. The settlement was surrounded by rocks, so it was easy to prepare for enemy attacks, and warriors stood at the ready. Diluc anxiously reported that this peaceful village was being threatened by the very type whose ominous silhouette appeared behind. The hooded skeleton Louis asked who the type was, and Diluc explained that it was someone who treated human lives like insects. Fortunately, however, Diluc thought he could take Louis and that marrying him would protect the village. Violet, furiously pulling away from Diluc's cheek, who cried out in pain, asked if that was why he'd proposed marriage to Louis, to which he replied that he'd had no choice. The green-haired man, who was being tugged by little Dracocia's hair, exclaimed that Louis might not care, but to him, Lebellum was a precious place that he must protect. The young skeleton man listened as Diluc said that this place was expensive enough to marry off his favorite daughter to a man he had just met. Diluc said with a smile, "Don't worry about it," but immediately asked in surprise, "Huh?" he asked again. The hooded skeleton Luis stated that if he could find what he needed, he would do anything. Diluc gave him a serious look, reminding him not to forget his promise and thought he should take it seriously too. The village of Lebellum spread out before them, nestled among the majestic mountains. Violet, Luis the skeleton, and little Dracosia were sampling the local food on sticks, and the young man wondered if he should buy more, and the demoness agreed approvingly. Diluc watched anxiously as the trio looked passionately at the wares on the market street, discussing new delicacies. The man with the green hair mumbled annoyingly that he had asked them to take the matter seriously. Diluc, holding a kebab in each hand, hurried after them, urging Luis to come with him as they continued to eat. The young skeleton man overheard a conversation between two men, one of whom was marveling at the hype around some princess, and the other explaining that she was simply dazzling. The same two discussed that the current festival was arranged in honor of a marriage proposal from a prince, and one was perplexed as to why one would go to such lengths for a princess from a small village. One of the interlocutors stated with confidence that the future of this village looked bright, but the other, laughing, countered that things were not so simple with their princess. Diluc, standing next to Luis the skeleton, explained that the princess had incredibly inflated demands. He added that she has been proposed to by countless men, but has all been rejected because of their looks. One of the townspeople remarked that the current prince was tall and handsome and hoped that everything would work out well. Luis the skeleton suggested that the princess must have taken after her mother, and Diluc assured him that he himself had been good-looking in his youth. Suddenly there was a loud scream and a man with purple hair rushed past them, being chased by someone. The man, pushing Diluc away, demanded that everyone get out of the way. The collision sent Diluc and the purple-haired man to the ground. Luis the skeleton asked Diluc if he was all right, to which he staggered and answered in the affirmative. Two companions, a girl and a helmeted warrior, ran up to the purple-haired man, worriedly asking if he was all right, the prince, but the latter irritably told him to let him go. The prince of the Umilis kingdom, the handsome Zibelram, thought with annoyance at how annoying this all was. The two townspeople, whispering, suggested that the prince had been rejected, judging by his behavior. Prince Zibelram thought with indignation that he, who had always heard only of his beauty, was rejected because of his ugliness. He grabbed Diluc by the collar in a rage, shouting if he wanted to die since he dared to block his path. Suddenly, Luis's bony hand intercepted the prince's wrist, and he demanded he apologize for pushing Diluc first. Zibelram pushed Diluc away and angrily called Luis the cloaked skeleton an ugly bastard. The prince's companions, a girl and a warrior, bared their swords and shouted indignantly how dare he raise his hand against their lord, calling him too bold. At that moment, Violet and the little dragoness threw their kebabs, which dug into the food of the prince's companions. The violet-haired girl and the demoness put sharp sticks to the necks of the stunned bodyguards and ordered them to drop their weapons or they would impale them. Prince Zibelram, trembling with humiliation, thought he had been called a freak twice in one day, and it was unbearable. Clutching the hilt of his sword, he muttered that this was the first time he had felt such anger today. Prince Zibelram, with face twisted with rage and sword drawn, shouted that he would kill them all. Suddenly, Luis Skeleton's bony hand gave Prince Zibelram a crushing blow to his face, causing him to let out a cry. Prince Zibelram collapsed to the ground helplessly, and his companions shouted in panic, turning to him. With a backdrop of city buildings and green flags depicting mountains, Diluc, Violet, and little Dracosia watched the scene. Unexpectedly, Princess Lebellum Sazel appeared, saying that she was concerned about the rejection and had gone out to see him off. Sazel, Princess of Lebellum, asked with a stern look what they were doing with her father. Louis, the hooded skeleton with a wide grin on his skull, looked at the princess who appeared. Princess Cecilie, upon seeing Diluc, asked in surprise if he was the missing Lord Diluc while Luis and Prince Zibelram were nearby. Prince Zibelram, still sitting on the ground, interjected with bewilderment and slight consternation. "T father-in-law?" He, stunned and confused, repeated his question, looking at Diluc. Princess Cecilie asked Prince Zibelram reproachfully if he still didn't realize that he had been refused, and then grabbed her father by the collar and threatened to kill him. Prince Zibelram tried to justify himself, assuring her that it was a misunderstanding, and he didn't know it was her father. but Cézelle looked at him doubtfully. The girl wondered if his father, the king, would believe it, while an ominous shadow loomed behind Zibelram's back. Cézelle stated that for the sake of the prince's image, she would leave things as they were and asked him not to make a fuss by turning away. She told Zibelram to return to her kingdom, her face expressing seriousness. The action moved to the majestic, multi-towered castle of Lebellum. Inside the castle, Cézelle ran up to her father, Diluc, anxiously asking what had happened to him and if he was all right. Diluc, looking haggard, exclaimed how much weight he had lost and that he barely recognized himself while Louise, Violet, and Dracocha watched the scene. Cézelle, holding her father's hands, asked with concern in her voice what had happened. Diluc replied to his daughter that he could not explain anything yet, but would do so when the time came, and she said understandingly that she was sure of his reasons. Diluc, turning to Cecilia, mentioned that he wanted to introduce someone to her. He then pointed to Louis in his cloak, calling him a man whose incredible beauty even he himself recognizes. Her father added that this was the man she had almost married, throwing Cecilia into shock, and all she could do was mumble, "What?" The princess asked in bewilderment what kind of wedding we were talking about, and Diluc hastened to reassure her by informing her that Louis had already said no. Cézelle exclaimed indignantly what was wrong with him for daring to refuse, but Diluc asked her not to take it personally, for he had not yet seen her face. The girl asked her father in amazement if he really recognized him and even proposed marriage, while Violet and Dracocha watched them against the backdrop of a fiery aura, and Diluc noted that he only cared about appearances. The princess, looking at Louise's hooded figure, wondered with bated breath if he was the man of her dreams. Diluc asked Louise what he thought of his daughter now that they had met, and if she regretted refusing the marriage, to which Cézelle angrily shouted, "Father!" Louis the skeleton peeked out from under his hood and hummed thoughtfully, looking at Cecilia, who swallowed nervously. The young skeleton boy bluntly stated that he didn't like her because she looked too much like Diluc, while Violet and Dracocha waved happily in the background, and Diluc looked extremely annoyed. Cézelle thought with a sly smile at how it felt to receive such a direct rejection. She declared Louis clever, suggesting that he had rejected her first for fear of her rejection, and suggested that he take off his cloak to get her attention. The princess added with a flirtatious smile that if he turned out to be really handsome, she might even marry him. The hooded skeleton Louise wondered with annoyance if she was really that shallow. Cézelle, whose face contorted with anger, cut off that she wasn't interested in him and demanded that he stop harassing her. She, pointing to Louis sitting across from her, resented him for calling her father an old man and speaking to her, the princess, informally, calling him an insolent brat. Cézelle, in a rage, ordered her guards to kill him immediately and skin him. The princess reached out her hand to Louis and said with anticipation that she wanted to see how handsome he really was. Suddenly, the two guards who had rushed at Louis were defeated and broke through the wall, and Cézelle screamed in terror. Violet and the little dragoness appeared next to Louis the skeleton, and the violet-haired girl informed Cecilia that she wouldn't be able to skin Sir Louis, and he confirmed her words. Cézelle thought with horror that the village's best guards had been defeated in one blow and wondered who these men were. Diluc jumped up from the couch and angrily asked Cecilia what she was doing and demanded that it stop immediately. The father reproachfully inquired of his daughter how she could have treated his guests so recklessly. Cézelle looked at her father with chagrin, who stated that he was disappointed in her. Diluc bowed low and apologized to Louis on behalf of his daughter, to which the latter replied that it was fine. The man told Cecilia that his guests were scared and told her to call it a day and head back, to which she reluctantly agreed. The princess, sighing heavily, left the room accompanied by two guards, where Diluc, Louis, Violet, and Dracocha remained. Turning around at the door, Cézelle informed her father that the Lord would be back in a few days and added, "and..." With a faint smile, she thanked him for his safe return. Louis the skeleton, seeing Diluc covering his face with his hands, asked the old man if he was all right. Diluc, jumping up abruptly, assured Louis that he was perfectly fine as he stared in surprise. The man with green hair informed Louis that there was a place he needed to visit before the Lord returned and headed for the exit, leaving the young man, Violet, and Dracocha behind. Diluc, with a sly smile, suggested they look around the village for now. Louis the skeleton, Violet, and little Draco stood in the room, and the skeleton agreed to Diluc's suggestion, saying, "Sure, why not?" The next day in the village square, flooded with sunlight and decorated with flowers, Louis noted that the weather was good. The young skeleton boy, holding a kebab, pronounced that the mood was great and the kebabs were delicious while Violet walked beside him. Louis the skeleton, Violet, and Draco noticed that they were being chased by Princess Sazelle and her guards, and the young man wondered why he was being chased by a dung fly, to which the princess responded indignantly. Louis the skeleton, still with the kebab, asked the princess why she was following them and if she had better things to do. Princess Cécilie, covering herself with sweat, mumbled embarrassedly that it was... The image of Louis in the hood arose in her mind, and she wondered if he was the man of her dreams. Princess Cécilie thought uneasily that Louis might be a dangerous man. The skeleton youth, standing with his back to her in the market square, replied, "Ha, suit yourself, but stay away from me." Cécilie, approaching him, became indignant. "You know, you're really overreacting. Do you really think I'm a dung fly?" Her high-heeled shoe suddenly bumped into a small rock. The princess, losing her balance and reaching out her hand, exclaimed in surprise, "Huh?" Louis the skeleton picked up the falling Cecilia in his arms amidst the glowing white flowers, and she thought, It can't be." The skeleton youth then abruptly let go of the princess, and she fell face first to the ground with a cry of, "Hop!" Skeleton, looking at Sazelle with a broken nose and eyes glowing with tears, rebuked, "Didn't I tell you to stay away? I almost got hurt because of you." And she thought, "What the hell?" The princess, angrily looking up at him from below with a bloody nose, shouted, "Is that all you have to say to someone who has just fallen down?" Louis's bony, gloved hand gently wiped the blood from Cécilie's nose with a handkerchief. Louis the skeleton squatted in front of Princess Cécilie and rebuked her, which was why he asked her not to follow him. The princess, holding the handkerchief, thought him so clumsy, though not a child, and the young man suggested that she take the thing and stop following him. Skeleton turned away from Cecilia and her guards and complained that she was causing his food to go cold, while Violet and Dracosia watched. Two guards helped the princess up, anxiously inquiring about her well-being, while she pondered what kind of man he was. Sazelle thought that so far all the men she had met so far had been fake and full of pretense, only showing off their cleaned-up side. Despite his rudeness, however, this unfiltered demeanor intrigued her while Louis, Violet, and Dracosia ate kebabs. Princess Sazelle, smiling, decided she was getting curiouser and curiouser. She hurried after Louis, Violet, and Dracosia, stating that she needed to catch up with him quickly, and the guards followed her. The three townspeople were discussing in amazement who the guy in the cloak was and why he was treating their princess so carelessly. One of them exclaimed, dumbfounded, that he understood why she was following someone like that. One of the townspeople, turning to the other, suddenly asked if the latter still didn't understand anything. Thoth explained that their princess was ridiculously obsessed with handsome men as she walked down the street. His interlocutor, wide-eyed with astonishment, exclaimed, "Does this mean that the first townie declared with certainty that that guy in the raincoat, Louis with the kebab, just had to be an incredibly handsome man." Meanwhile, the princess was in her chambers lamenting to her maid that she had followed him all day, but he had never once removed his cloak. Sazelle said thoughtfully, wondering if he was really that attractive. The maid reported that rumors about Louis were already spreading through the village. The princess clarified with hope and excitement in her voice, "He's not handsome, is he?" The girl confirmed that he was rumored to be incredibly handsome, which puzzled Sazelle a bit. The princess remembered how everywhere she went, a crowd followed her shouting her name as she followed Louis. Even the villagers have begun to notice Louis, whispering that the princess is following some guy who is rumored to be incredibly handsome. Rumors of his appearance even reached the ears of the princess when a maid addressed her in her chambers. These conversations made her heart beat faster, anticipating something extraordinary. The princess, blushing, wondered excitedly if he was really that attractive. Meanwhile, the cloaked skeleton Louis was perplexed as to who was talking about him right now and why his ear was so itchy. In the market square, the young skeleton boy, along with Violet and the little Dracosia, were horrified to find that there was only one kebab left. The salesman guiltily informed me that this was really the last one he could offer. Louis the skeleton and Violet asked indignantly how this could have happened, since they had been coming here since morning, and why there was nothing left. The merchant, visibly nervous, began to explain the situation. The little dragoness was stroking her stuffed belly with a satisfied look, and the vendor hinted that she had already eaten quite a lot of it, and lately, for some reason. The merchant thoughtfully reported that the cockatrices had not appeared in the vicinity of the village recently. The salesman exclaimed in horror, wondering if Luis had gone mad, offering to catch one and if he wanted to die. The man explained that cockatrices are usually hunted with traps, showing hunters at the pit. He added that a live cockatrix is ferocious and dangerous as it spews poisonous gas, against which an image of the monster emerged. The vendor, holding out the last kebab, asked them to wait a little longer. The trader suggested they take the last piece, adding that if they were lucky they might catch one by tomorrow. Luis the skeleton, holding the treat in his hand, silently pondered what he had heard. The salesman interjected in amazement, "What?" when Luis declared that he was now even more eager to catch a cockatrix. The young skeleton boy took a bite out of the kebab and thought with anticipation how delicious freshly grilled cockatrices must be. Luis the skeleton, dragging Violet and Dracocha behind him, shouted, "Go, all of you!" as the merchant shouted in desperation after them to warn them of the danger, and Princess Sezelje watched them. The guard worriedly asked the princess what they should do, to which she replied, smiling slightly, that of course they would follow them. Luis the skeleton, Violet, and little Draco were walking through the dark forest toward the tower seen ahead, and a large owl with a bat in its talons flew overhead. Princess Cecilie, surrounded by guards, wondered where this cockatrix was, and if the absence was proof that he was not here. Violet informed Sir Lewis that she thought this was the place, but he, breathing heavily, replied that he could see nothing, and little Draco complained of fatigue. The young skeleton man turned away and motioned for his companions to return to the village. The captain of the Knights of Lebellum village, Harbang, suddenly appeared, noting that the sun was already beginning to set. Harbang, noticing Princess Cizelle, added that it could be dangerous here as darkness fell. The captain of the knights offered to stop and go back, but Luis the skeleton was adamant that he didn't want to. The young skeleton man waved the princess away, wondering why she had followed them in the first place, and advised her to go back if she was only going to get in the way. Princess Cizelle looked at Harbang and assured him that she was fine. Harbang, standing back, clutched the hilt of his sword tightly. He turned around abruptly, his sword flashed with blue energy, while Luis the skeleton calmly watched. Harbang noted with surprise that the man didn't even move, and wondered if he had noticed it after all. The captain of the knights asked defiantly, wondering if Luis thought he wouldn't strike, and blue energy swirled around them. Luis the skeleton, getting covered in sweat, thought he might have realized since he hadn't seen anything. The three guards, covered in sweat, reported that they had heard of his power and how he had defeated their men in his absence. Princess Cizelle said she would forgive him this time for the sake of chivalry, and told Harbang to show her proper respect from now on. Little Dragoness, grabbing Harbang by the hair, and Violet holding a dagger to his throat, warned that if he didn't, he would meet his end at their hands. Harbang realized with horror when they managed to get behind him. Violet, leaning over him, asked if he was trying her patience, for she had held back long enough as it was. Violet reflected that Lord Dillick had asked Louis to marry his daughter. Then she remembered how the princess had tried to kill Sir Lewis by ordering the guards to skin him. The girl thought that even Harbang, who pointed his sword at Sir Lewis's neck, deserved attention. The little dragoness, flying swiftly past, declared that although she would like to slaughter everyone here, she would hold back. The demoness, brushing Harbang aside, added that she would refrain from reprisal for the sake of their flower. Violet, holding her dagger in her hand, watched silently, pondering the situation. Harbang, flying away from the impact, crashed into the ground, and Princess Sezelje cried out fearfully. Cizelle, surrounded by a blue glow, declared that no one was allowed to disrespect Sir Lewis. Violet and little Dragoness advised the princess to admire the flower with her eyes only. The girl with purple hair added firmly that it was not a request but a warning. Princess Cizelle looked at what was happening with a surprised and slightly frightened expression. Violet and Dracocha worriedly asked Luis if he was okay as he lay on the ground, while the princess watched silently. Cizelle, sitting on the ground, addressed someone as princess while the impact mark was visible next to her. Harbang, the captain of the knights, along with his warriors, knelt before the princess, asking for orders to be given. Princess Cecilie interjected with bewilderment and a drop of sweat on her temple. Orders? Harbang, looking away, stated that insulting the princess was tantamount to insulting all of Lebellum. Cecily listened to the captain of the knights with a serious expression. Harbang, clutching the hilt of his sword and flashing his eye, asked only to give an order and they would fight to the death. A red flash appeared against the night sky with trees, symbolizing tension or the beginning of action. Princess Sazelle's hand stopped Harbang, who looked at her in surprise as she uttered, "Princess!" Princess Sazelle sternly warned Harbang that if he ever said he was going to die again, she would make sure it happened by her hand. The captain of the knights clenched his teeth and listened to her words, his face expressing humility. Harbang's hand trembled as he lowered it, realizing the gravity of the situation. The captain of the knights, standing before his warriors and the princess, assured that he would not do it again. Violet worriedly asked Luis the skeleton if he was okay, and the latter wondered if he should be the first to be rescued in case of danger. Little Dragoness confidently declared that she believed in Sir Lewis's abilities, to which the latter interjected with a surprised, "abilities." The demoness excitedly explained that although he looked like a weak and useless skeleton, he still possessed super regeneration. Luis the skeleton thought with a wry grin about whether he should slap the sassy girl, but immediately decided he might lose. The young skeleton boy waved it off and suggested forgetting about it and hurrying off to find Cockatrix, dragging Violet and Dracosia along with him. Suddenly the ground shook, and Louis the skeleton with Violet and Dracosia exclaimed in surprise that it was an earthquake, and the demoness pointed somewhere, shouting, "Sir Lewis, over there!" Harbang loudly commanded, "Prepare for battle!" and Princess Sazelle behind him ordered her to protect her. Violet, holding up the dagger and with a slight chuckle, remarked that it was too late. Louis the skeleton, Violet, and little Draco watched the ominous red swirl in the sky above the dark forest. A young skeleton man in a cloak fought off the forest animals that swooped down on him, a rabbit, an owl, and a hedgehog. One of the guards asked in bewilderment, "Animals?" while the other, smiling, shouted, "Look back, quick!" A huge gorilla with glowing eyes rushed straight at them, causing the guard to shriek, "Gee, gorilla!" Little Dragoness pointed out to Louis the skeleton, over which a question mark appeared, that the gorilla looked strange and asked him to take a closer look. A close-up of the gorilla's crying face was seen, and Dracosia confirmed that the gorilla was crying. A bright red energy beam swiftly swept through the night forest. The gorilla's silhouette was pierced by this beam, causing the creature to be thrown backwards. Violet informed Sir Louis that they had found him, and he realized exactly what they had eaten so deliciously, while a glowing red hand could be seen below. Before them appeared a huge cockatrix with glowing red eyes, purple smoke coming from its beak, and a signature that read, "Cockatrix." The two helmeted guards exclaimed in horror at what it was and asked him to wait. The head of a cockatrix with a ferociously burning red eye was shown in close-up, surrounded by red energy. Several cockatrix heads lined up in a row, all with ominously glowing red eyes hinting at their numbers. Harbang, the captain of the knights, explained that an adult cockatrix usually kept to himself. 3 giant cockatrixes with burning eyes and dark aura appeared before Luis, Violet, and Dracosia, and Harbang wondered why they were huddled together in a pack. Knight Captain Harbang loudly ordered his men to protect the princess. One of the cockatrixes swiftly swooped down on the small group of warriors protecting the princess. Harbang swung his glowing blue sword and deflected the cockatrix's attack, sending sparks flying in all directions. Princess Sazelle smilingly encouraged Harbang, who, covered in sweat, was struggling to hold back the onslaught. The captain of the knights, surrounded by the blue glow of his sword, vowed not to let the enemy get a single step closer to the princess. Harbang prepared to use his secret technique. A powerful blue aura enveloped his sword and body. He used the great sword swing, unleashing the full power of his strike on one of the cockatrixes. The monster let out a piercing cry of "Coca!" and Harbang groaned in pain or exertion. Harbang's powerful blue energy blast struck the cockatrix, causing a bright flash. Taking advantage of the moment, the other knights rushed to attack the weakened monster, shouting, "Now's my chance!" The eye of the defeated cockatrix reflected the figure of the knight, and he said with a bewildered expression, Coca? Suddenly a small cockatrix chick hatched out of the broken egg, making a squeaky caca noise while the adults looked on in surprise. The little cockatrix spread its wings and ran swiftly across the ground, leaving a trail of footprints behind it. I imagined a pair of cockatrices, blue and turquoise, posing together amicably against a brightly colored background. The two then looked at each other fondly, with little hearts floating between them. Against the backdrop of the sunset, one of the Cockatrix silhouettes on the beach was holding out a roll of worms to another. The turquoise Cockatrix looked at the treat doubtfully, then turned away resolutely. Blue Cockatrix, in tears, lamented why he was being rejected, since they had been so good together while the worm bundle lay on the sand. He continued to harp on the fact that they had hunted together and even shared worms, while Turquoise walked away. The turquoise Cockatrix turned around, asking reproachfully if the man didn't understand anything at all. With tears in his eyes and the reflection of a silhouette in his pupil, the turquoise Cockatrix reminded him that he'd talked about being allergic to worms many times, and suggested that it was over since he was tired. The blue Cockatrix's eye suddenly flashed with an ominous light, and he exclaimed in bewilderment, "Coca? Ah, why am I here?" A huge blue Cockatrix, surrounded by a blue glow, was furiously fighting off several warriors attacking it in the dark forest. The three knights in blue armor joyfully reported to the commander that they had defeated the Cockatrix. Princess Sizelle and Harbang stood side by side, and the captain proudly announced that she could now be at ease, noting to herself the increased strength of her warriors. Harbang, clenching his fist and with a satisfied smile, turned to Luis, boasting of the power of the Lebellum knights. Louis the Skeleton, Violet, and Little Draco stood over the three defeated Cockatrixes, the demoness demanding more monsters, and Harbang shrieked in horror. The captain of the knights, covered in sweat, informed the princess that these three were real monsters, to which Cecily replied with a strained smile that he knew nothing, unlike the others. Princess Sizelle suggested with a serious look that she should return to the village while an ominous shadowy silhouette with a red eye appeared behind her. A blue Cockatrix with a glowing red eye began spewing a thick purple cloud of poisonous gas. Harbang, finding himself in a noxious fog, struggled to pronounce that the gas was preventing him from seeing. Princess Sizelle, covering her mouth and nose with her hand in a cloud of gas, mentally addressed Harbang, ordering him to protect her and hold his breath. A close-up of Cizelle's face with glowing yellow eyes expressed the realization that she had already inhaled the poisonous gas. Someone's booted foot stepped forward resolutely through the puffs of purple smoke. Princess Cecilier, surrounded by the poisonous mist, covered her mouth with her hand in surprise. Luis the Skeleton appeared beside her and asked her if she was okay, and the princess whispered his name. A blue Cockatrix, pointing a claw, defiantly addressed someone, "Hey, chickenhead!" The monster accused them of a cowardly attack from the back, saying they had chosen the wrong opponent, and called the princess a useless burden. Cizelle looked indignantly at the Cockatrix who had called her scraps and asked him to stop. The young skeleton man raised a finger and sternly reprimanded the monster, saying that even monsters should have some decency, and wondered who had taught him to behave so recklessly. The silhouette of a Cockatrix loomed against the dark forest, and Luis wondered if the man thought the world revolved around him. A rebuke sounded in the Cockatrix's thoughts. "You never care about anyone but yourself, do you?" The monster with its beak distorted with anger wheezed, "Coca! What do you even know?" The blue Cockatrix shouted in rage that the humans didn't understand anything and swiftly flew at them. The beast, falling down, thought wistfully that they could not understand his love. His eye grew dim. The defeated Cockatrix lay on the ground amidst puffs of smoke, while the knights worried about the princess. Harbang bitterly noted that the monster seemed to have used up all its strength and stopped breathing, recognizing this as its failure. The captain of the knights was perplexed as to how Luis could know that the Cockatrix was already at his limit, while Violet and Dracotia marveled at the young man. Harbang pondered whether such equanimity was natural for one who could control the powerful. Princess Cecilier watched in amazement as Luis the Skeleton doused himself with some sort of liquid, wondering what kind of power he possessed. The girl asked the departing Luis what he wanted as he continued his manipulations with the vial. The young skeleton man holding the unconscious princess in his arms thought that she must have had a reason to throw herself into the poisonous gas to save him, and squeamishly noted her saliva. Luis the Skeleton wondered why the poison gas didn't affect him, assuming it was because he was made up of only bones. Princess Sizelle offered him a smile as she spoke her wish, promising to grant him one. Luis the Skeleton rebuked her for being rude to the princess, much to her consternation, and someone off-screen exclaimed indignantly, "What?" Against the backdrop of the night sky with a full moon, it sounded that the one who saved a life should be thanked, not asked what he wanted. The skeleton youth looked at the princess and sternly told her to listen carefully and stay out of his business from now on. Cecily, with wide-open yellow eyes, listened to his words in silence. Louis the Skeleton, Violet, and little Draco dragged 2 huge-bound cockatrixes, and the young man declared that this was all he wanted. The princess, standing in the distance with Harbang, indignantly shouted whoever said she was interested in his affairs, and Louis the Skeleton called out, "Hey!" to her. Cecile, waving her arms around, asked Harbang if he'd heard what Louis had said, if he'd lost his mind, and if she looked like she was interested. Harbang declared with a satisfied smile that he was the most handsome man in the world, and he wasn't interested in anyone but the absolute best-looking man in the world. A huge cockatrix carcass was roasting on a large fire in the middle of the market square, emitting puffs of smoke. Diluc was gorging himself on a huge piece of roasted meat with gusto, savoring every moment. Violet asked Diluc to stop slurping as it spoiled her appetite, while he lamented why he was always the one being scolded. Pointing to Louis the Skeleton, who was also eating, Diluc asked if the latter was worse, to which the young man asked in surprise what he meant. Diluc was in tears as he listened to Violet and Dracotia marvel at how hearty Sir Louis was eating, and the demoness confirmed their words. Sitting by the fire, Louis asked Diluc if he had said he would be back soon, and if he had been hungry all this time, to which the man replied that circumstances had not permitted eating. Diluc's face expressed thoughtfulness as he silently considered what was happening. At the big fire, Diluc thanked Louis, who in return asked what for. The man explained that the villagers were happy because of Louis, and in the background could be seen joyful people feasting by the fire. With a serious and grateful look, Diluc spoke words of appreciation to Louis for saving the life of the most beautiful woman in the world. Louis the Skeleton, with a slight grin on his skull, suggested that Diluc, since he was so grateful, give him the map. Diluc reminded him that the map would be his once he saved the village, and the young skeleton man didn't seem intent on relenting. The green-haired man tried to clear up the map while Louis ate, and Violet offered him more treats, and Dragoness chewed with gusto as well. Diluc sighed in frustration, wondering why he was even wasting words since it was useless. Against the backdrop of majestic mountains with a bright glow coming from the top, 2 figures stood, and one of them said, "Lord." A man with dark hair and a scar on his face reported that he received it as commanded. The same warrior, along with another long-haired man and a cloaked figure, said, "All right, let's go." A long-haired man with a sinister smile invited them to his village, Lebellum, introducing himself as Lord Lebellum Slim. If you like this story and want part 2, write the secret word, skeleton, in the comments. That way I'll know that you've seen it to the end and want part 2. And if you want to see part 2 as soon as possible, let's get 1,000 likes. See you later and bye-bye.